and welcome to, I want to say a Katie Halper show, but this is so much more than the Katie Halper show. This is the Katie Halper show, joins forces with many other shows and many other women across the globe, mostly across the room, to free Stephen Donziger. And I'm one of your co-hosts. Let me just take the time to look at all of them. Okay, I'm one of the co-hosts, Katie Halper, and I'm joined by
Marianne Williamson,
Krystal
and Briahna Gray.
And we have a great show for you tonight. We are here to raise awareness about the case of Stephen Donziger. As people know, probably from our shows, or one of the kind of two other places maybe you've heard talk about this, because the media's been very mum on this, of course. But people, you probably know that Stephen Donziger is an incredibly brave human rights attorney who is serving time in prison. He is the person in prison over the crimes committed by Chevron. His crime was going after Chevron and suing them on behalf of indigenous people in the Ecuadorian Amazon whose water was poisoned. And because he actually successfully sued Chevron, he is behind bars. And Chevron has not had to pay the lawsuit that they were demanded to pay.
That's
so
right.
We are here to raise awareness. We're also here to raise funds. Krystal, do you want to talk?
Yeah, so few goals tonight. Number one, as Katie was just saying, look, Stephen's in prison, and so he can't speak, he can't address the media, he can't come on our shows anymore. It is incumbent upon us and good people out there who care to raise hell about this, because it is an outrageous injustice, both for Stephen and his family personally, but obviously with massive implications for the country, for environmental activists, for indigenous peoples. If they can do this to Stephen, they can do it to literally anyone. So we have to keep the pressure on. We have to keep the political momentum going. We have had a few members of Congress, encouragingly, who have at least put out statements, who are starting to raise their voices and put some pressure on. But this is an insane situation, an insane state of affairs that we have to absolutely do everything we can to stop. The second goal, as you said, is, listen, Chevron put out there, and this came out in Discovery, that their whole plan was to, quote, demonize Donziger. That was their plan. They set out to destroy this man and to destroy his life and his livelihood. And of course, on top of forcing him to be disbarred and him being able to work and being on home confinement, he's also racked up massive legal bills because of these insane trials that he's been put through over and over again. So if you're able to contribute to his legal defense fund, the link is right there. Donate at freedonziger.com. I talked to Sagar about it. Breaking Points is going to contribute $1,000 to get that donation drive moving in the right direction. Listen, if you're able, this man deserves all the support that we can possibly give him. And then, you know, in terms of the show tonight, as Katie said, we have incredible lineup, truly, truly incredible lineup. I won't go through the whole list, but I'll give you a few of the names. We've got Susan Sarandon, we've got Lucy Lawless, we've got David Sirota, we've got Richard Wolff, we've got Chris Hedges, we have Nina Turner, we have activists, who are intimately familiar with the case and with the work that Stephen was doing down in Ecuador. We have his lawyers to give us an update on the case so that we know exactly where we stand. And you also have all of us. And so the big plan is, after all of this, the four of us are going to hijack The View, hold them hostage, and do their show for them, saying all sorts of uncomfortable things for everybody in power until they let this man out of prison. So that's the bigger goal.
Yes, hijacking America's most valuable asset, bringing the Biden administration to its knees and Donziger to justice finally.
That's right.
And look, there's a reason why so many of us and so many compelling people have decided to tune in tonight and to cover them on their shows and raise awareness all this time, is because the scope of what's going on here is really extreme at both ends. On the first and foremost, on the Ecuador end, the scale and scope of both the judgment that was correlated to the level of pollution is really extreme. Remember, at the time, and perhaps still today, it was the largest ever judgment against an oil company of this kind, $8.5 billion, right? And instead of actually collecting on that judgment or paying that judgment, instead Chevron has spent billions of dollars trying to, in legal fees, avoiding paying that judgment and doing things like prosecuting Stephen Donziger, to Krystal's point, to scare other activists out of pursuing these kinds of causes, right? And on this end, the kind of persecution that's going on here is truly a corporate prosecution. The district attorney's office in New York declined to prosecute, either because they didn't think there was anything there. And because there's no substance to the case, instead, the judge who has demonstrated a vendetta of sorts against Donziger gave the right to prosecute basically to a law firm, Gibson Dunn, that has ties itself, of course, to the oil and gas industry, to Chevron directly. So because of the gall and the enormity of what's going on, I think it's galvanized a lot of really important actors to get involved, and we hope that you share in that with us tonight.
Stephen would also want us to remember that this is very much about the way fossil fuel companies have and unfortunately continue to treat peoples from indigenous cultures. This crime, of course, was in the Amazonian swath in Ecuador, where the environmental standards were even less than in the United States. This original crime was done by Texaco, which was later bought by Chevron back in the 1960s. And what they did was that, and they admit this is not even open to question at this point, is that in order to save $3 a pit, they unlined the pits. You can imagine what this meant in terms of the pollutants in the water, in the food, in the ground, even in the air, and would actually say to the indigenous farmers there, oh, this is good for you. It's got vitamins in it. It's got mother's milk. And when you think about that $8.5 billion judgment, if that correlates to the level of pollution, then remember what that means. And I think Stephen would also want us to remember, which we do anyway, that this level of criminality towards the rights, the human rights, the land rights, continues to this day, both in the United States and in Canada. So many of these things that happened before are still happening. And the kind of stand that we're all taking now is not just for the sake of Stephen Donziger. It's for the sake of all environmental activists, all human rights activists, all the people such as these indigenous tribes that are being hurt, all private citizens that, as Briahna and Kate and Krystal have already said, could be prosecuted. I mean, if a corporation can prosecute any American citizen in a way that I think none of us even would have thought could happen, then that could happen to any of us. So we're in here for something really big, galvanizing a movement. As Stephen said to me in a letter, he said, something special is happening. We are galvanizing a movement around the fundamental issue, the need to protect all advocates who work to hold polluters accountable and to help save our planet while upholding the highest standards of human rights.
And we are going to get moving with bringing our guests because we have such an amazing show for you. Just quickly, a logistical point. You can also donate, so please go to freedonziger.com. Also, if you're watching on YouTube and you donate to a super chat, I'm going to give all the super chats from tonight's stream to that.
Awesome.
So, for the lazy people out there, just want to click.
We want to make it
Yeah,
as easy as possible
yeah.
for people to support Stephen.
Yes. So we're going to be bringing on our first amazing set of guests. We are bringing on Giada Loubomirski, who is an artist, producer, activist, and the founder of EcoShaker, a community-driven platform dedicated to environmental education and action. During the last 8 months, Giada fully committed herself to help organize and manage the on-the-ground movement to free Donziger and NYC. She helped Stephen, the Ecuadorian community activists from all over the world and various organizations come together. And we're also going to be bringing on Paul Pasi-Mino, Associate Director at Amazon Watch, who has overseen its Clean Up Ecuador campaign ever since 2007. He's been a professional human rights, corporate accountability, and environmental justice advocate for over 25 years. And we are just going to bring in these two amazing guests. We're so glad to have you join us. Thank you so much for joining.
Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Hi.
It's great to meet you all. It's nice to see you again, Marianne.
Nice to see you, Paul. So glad you're here with us.
Yeah. I'm having an issue hearing them. Can everyone else?
Oh, you're not hearing them? No. I'm hearing them.
All right. Well,
yeah.
I can hear them through Marianne's thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
They have
Again,
super hearing.
Yeah. So, hi, guys. If we could start with you, Paul, just can you, because you've been working on this case for a while, and thanks to both of you for your tireless efforts. Paul, can you set up for the audience the story of this case of Chevron's poisoning of the waters and the case of Stephen Donziger?
Sure. I'll do my best to condense it because it's such a long saga. So as you mentioned, I'm the Associate Director at Amazon Watch. Amazon Watch has been around for 25 years, and we work in solidarity with indigenous communities to protect the Amazon rainforest and advance their rights. As part of our work, we've been accompanying this campaign for justice in Ecuador since 2000. The legacy of Chevron's destruction is continuing every single day, not just with the pollution that remains there, an area the size of Manhattan or Rhode Island, but every single day more crude is extracted from the Amazon, and about 20% of that from the Ecuadorian Amazon is still being refined by Chevron in California. So while what I'm going to tell you about happened in the past as far as their destruction, they continue to profit off the destruction of the rainforest and our environment, specifically in Ecuador, every single day. So what happened was in the 1960s, before any oil company had ever drilled for oil in the Amazon, Texaco went down, signed a consortium agreement with the government of Ecuador, and developed oil fields in the northern Ecuadorian Amazon called the Oriente. They had the exclusive production rights. They operated as a consortium, but they were the sole operator, right? So they were the ones who decided how to operate and what to do. And as Marianne mentioned, they designed a system to pollute deliberately. In order to save $3 a barrel, they extracted heavy foundation waters. When you extract crude, before you get to the crude, you get this heavy water that's laced with carcinogens and other toxins. Instead of following the standard in the United States and everywhere else of storing that foundation water in tanks and then re-injecting it into the earth, they decided that they would save $3 a barrel. They simply dug pits into the Amazon rainforest and dumped that waste into the environment where it would drain directly into the drinking water of indigenous peoples and other peoples who've lived there, essentially 30,000 people. So it's not an exaggeration to say that they intentionally poisoned the drinking water of 30,000 people over the course of decades for a profit. In 1992, when their consortium ended, they lifted their hands and said, we're out, we're done, we're going to leave this system to the government of Ecuador. You can operate it from this point forward. So they left a system that was still polluting, and then they signed a corrupt agreement with the government of Ecuador for $40 million for an alleged remediation. They left 917 of those pits that I mentioned, which every day rain would go into and it would drain into local waterways. Then they washed their hands of it and thought they were free. But that's when Stephen Donziger stepped in with other lawyers and filed a class action lawsuit against Texaco in New York, where their headquarters was. They spent 8 years fighting in New York for the right to be heard after this company, which had deliberately poisoned them, not hiding its acts, had committed these crimes. And yet, after 8 years, they were sent packing. The Southern District of New York, the same one that just prosecuted Stephen and put him in jail, told Ecuadorian people they could not seek justice there, and they accepted Chevron's argument that the case should be held in Ecuador. At that point, Chevron and Texaco merged. It's the same company, some of the same executives, same liability. They tried to say that it was Texaco and not Chevron, but we all know the truth is it's the same company. So the Ecuadorians started the lawsuit again in Ecuador. And after 8 more years, they won a $9.5 billion judgment. That included mostly Chevron's scientific samples of contamination. So hundreds of thousands of pages of evidence. Over the course of almost a decade, this case went on. And based on Chevron's evidence, they were found liable for $9.5 billion. But they said, there's no way we're going to pay. They said famously, we're going to fight till hell freezes over and then fight it out on the ice. And 2 weeks before that judgment was issued, they preemptively sued Stephen Donziger and the Ecuadorians back in that same district of New York that had sent them packing before, saying that the entire thing was a scheme. And not only Stephen, Amazon Watch, journalists, shareholders, anyone that had worked on behalf or advocated on behalf of the Ecuadorian citizens was rolled into this RICO suit. And that's the real threat to all of our activism in the United States. This judge, Lewis Kaplan, allowed them to bring this suit, would not allow a jury, and had Stephen sued at that point for $60 billion. On the eve of the trial, they dropped the money damages so that they wouldn't have to have a jury. They found, on behalf of Chevron, after listening to the testimony of a bribed witness who was paid $2 million in cash and benefits by Chevron to lie on their behalf, who later admitted that he did it and that he did it for a payout. Wow. That's how they won this RICO decision. And that decision is what Chevron has since used to scare away other people from working for justice in this case, and ultimately to put Stephen in jail by saying that he isn't complying with the decisions made by Kaplan. What's important to mention, and I know I've talked for a long time and I've left a lot out, unfortunately, is that their targeting of Stephen and the fact that you're talking about this now is showing what Stephen has said to be true is coming true. They have actually helped galvanize a movement, because by targeting him in this way, the world has woken back up to the severity of their crime, and even worse, the severity of their retaliation for those who fight them. We are in the streets every day challenging the fossil fuel industry. It's one thing to go out there and hold a sign and march, which we should all do, but look what happens when we actually hold them to account, when we bring them into court and get a victory. They turn around and use the US government and the US judicial system to crush the people bringing that victory and try to silence them. So this pushback is incredibly important, not just for Ecuador, for Peru, for all the Amazon, but everywhere that we're challenging the fossil fuel industry. And that's why it's so critical that you're talking about it now. And I love the way you opened it up, because it was so important to cover the broader issues, Marianne. Like you said, this is the front of the climate justice movement. If Stephen isn't protected, we cannot hold these companies accountable for what they're doing.
Well, and when I try to explain the case to people, they have such a hard time wrapping their head around it, because it's so dissonant from their understanding of how the justice system is supposed to work. They almost can't believe it. I mean, that it literally is the case. I actually tried to explain the situation to my 4-year-old today, because she wanted to know why mommy wasn't going to be there tonight, and I was trying to break it down as basic as I could. Because when it comes down to it, it's very simple. Chevron committed mass crimes in Ecuador, poisoned people, poisoned the water, devastated their well-being, devastated their homes, devastated their health. But instead of them ever being held accountable whatsoever or paying $1 in restitution for their crimes, they instead have criminalized this man and put him in prison. Giada, I wanted to bring you into the conversation here, because Paul made the point, Marianne was mentioning from Stephen's letter too, that this has galvanized a movement. Well, you've been at the forefront of that movement. What is it that brought you to Stephen's cause? Giada?
Oh, is she frozen?
She's frozen.
Yeah.
Chevron.
You know, it's interesting, Krystal, because the CEO of Chevron was recently speaking before Congress, and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, rather famously at this point, said to him, first of all, it was fascinating watching the look on his face. She was talking to him about this case, and he acted like he didn't even know what she was talking about. And he pointed out, she said to him, there are more of us than there are you, and you can't arrest all of us. And I think she deserves a big applause for that.
Giada, are you can hear us now? She was frozen there for a minute. So
I don't know what happened.
I was just asking about what brought you to Stephen's case, because you've been at the forefront of this movement that this injustice has really galvanized.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor to be here. I mean, I found out about Stephen's case and Ecuador's case through the famous documentary Crude on YouTube. And like you mentioned, it's a very hard case to wrap your brain around. So it kind of stayed with me. And then one of my social media followers tagged me on Stephen's page, and I realized it was the same lawyer, and freaked out, because I was like, wait a minute, this is a human rights lawyer who's been at the front line of this fight, and he's in house arrest in the city I live in. I went berserk and I contacted him right away, and it just started from March 2nd, and I have not left Stephen's side and his family's side, and been trying to do everything that I possibly can. I dropped all my projects to fully work on this, and because I saw that nobody was really helping manage the old support, the existing support, and the new support coming in. So I had to just use all the resources that I had, tap into my community, which is the creative community in New York City, fashion, art, and the environmental community that I work with. And I just couldn't believe that everyone I asked, nobody had ever heard of this case. And we're talking about the largest environmental disaster in the world right now that's been sitting there for 28 years. So I said to myself, you know what? I have a lot of projects going on, but this is the most important environmental case in the history of the world. That's the way I see it, because what Stephen represents and what this case symbolizes is actually an American corporation that is committing genocide, ecocide in 31 countries. I'm not sure if you're going to have Dr. Nangrier on, but I recommend that everybody study her forensic report on the genocidal crimes, which involved rape, torture, cancer, deaths by cancer, kidnappings, and flat out murders that Chevron has been a part of. Their model is, I'm going to partner with dictatorships, destroy indigenous and marginalized communities to the point that they can no longer survive on this land. They cannot survive. So what ends up happening here is that we're looking at a very big, huge problem. Why are we allowing for white supremacy to lead capitalism and destroy truth, which is what Stephen represents and what the Ecuadorian community in the Amazon represents? There's babies and children that are still dying in Lago Agrio in Ecuador, and people really need to understand, the viewers that are watching today need to understand, it is vital that we get Stephen out of jail immediately, and that if you can, please support Stephen and what I see, a global genocidal problem and crimes committed by one of the largest, if not the largest, big oil American corporation in the world. We all have to stick together, just like you mentioned now with Congresswoman Tlaib. You can't arrest the truth and you can't arrest us all, but the only way we're going to grow this movement and to have positive results and for them to hold them accountable and make justice be served is if we all stay united, because Chevron's model is to tire everybody out. You have no idea how many supporters I have met that have been by Stephen's side for over 20 years who come and go because they cannot believe this is still going on. And this is their tactic. This is their model. They want to tire us all out so we give up. But guess what? We are here and we're not going anywhere, and we're just getting stronger by the minute. And so that's basically what I have to say. But I have a lot more to say, and obviously there's so many guests, so I don't want to take up too much time.
Well, Giada and Paul, both of you, thank you so much for laying out so eloquently what the stakes are, what the crimes were that were committed. Thank you for your activism and for being there for Stephen through all of this.
Your perseverance.
Your perseverance absolutely is an inspiration. So thank you both so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. And I know Stephen really wants everyone to understand. He knows he will make it through this, but he's going to leave that place with that entire movement behind him that is so much stronger, and it's going to backfire on Chevron in the end. All of this is going to backfire. We're going to make sure that it does.
We're going to make sure. That's the point. We're going to make sure.
FreeDonziger.com. Everybody.
That's right. FreeDonziger.com. Again, guys, Chevron has put Stephen through hell, with massive legal bills is just one aspect of this fight. And so if you can, give to FreeDonziger.com, or as Katie said earlier, if you donate in the super chat, she's going to donate all of that to Stephen's Legal Defense Fund so that he can afford to continue this battle.
Yeah. And we're actually going to hear from someone who makes the case really, really well, extremely eloquently, and from a lot of personal experience about why this is such an important fight, because the fight for Stephen Donziger's freedom is also the fight for justice for the people of Ecuador. So I actually spoke to Luis Llanza, who is from the Defend the Amazon Coalition. He's someone who has fought side by side with Stephen, and he lives in the region that has been so poisoned by Chevron. So here are some moments from my talk with Luis Llanza.
Le conocí a Stephen en el año 1994, pocos meses después de que se constituyó el Frente de Defensa de la Amazonía. Él viajó a Lago Agrio a una reunión con los dirigentes de las comunidades afectadas por Texaco Mis padres emigraron desde el sur de la Amazonía eh, hacia el norte, al Lago Agrio. Sobre todo mi padre conoció primero el Lago Agrio y le gustó porque presentaba, según él, oportunidades para mejorar las condiciones económicas de la familia. Llegué solo al Lago Agrio después de viajar 3 días y 5:30 de la mañana aproximadamente bajé del bus y lo primero que pisé fue algo viscoso, aceitoso y olía a combustible. Y cuando clarificó un poco más el día, vi que toda la calle de lo que es hoy Lago Agrio estaba de color negro, aceitoso, y era petróleo que Texaco acostumbraba a regar en las carreteras con fines de mantener esas carreteras en buen estado. Al inicio, muchas personas no eran conscientes de las consecuencias que podrían ocurrir en los posteriores años. Estoy hablando de las personas que llegaron primero al Lago Agrio en los años 70, pero ya por los años 80, mediados 90, se empezaron a ver con mayor intensidad las consecuencias. Por ejemplo, la muerte de los animales por beber agua contaminada de los campesinos. Los cultivos se destruían porque había lluvia ácida debido a que Texaco quemaba gas al aire libre y eso producía lluvia ácida. Y después ya los casos de muchas personas que se enfermaron y morían con cáncer. Personalmente, en casi 3 décadas de estar en esta lucha, he visto muchísima gente que se ha enfermado y ha muerto. Ya no están con nosotros y eso es muy, muy, muy doloroso. Incluso compañeros que iniciaron esta lucha conmigo, hoy ya no están conmigo y ya no están con los demás compañeros que están vivos todavía. Pues la vida de la mayoría de las miles de familias que viven junto a las piscinas, que si bien no se puede observar como hace 20 años, eso no quiere decir que no existan, están ocultos, pero siguen contaminando el agua, siguen contaminando el ambiente. Los derrames de crudo, de petróleo no han sido limpiados y todo eso con el tiempo afecta los medios de vida de la gente, pero también su propia vida. No se puede hablar de una mejor calidad de vida si es que tienen hermanos, hijos, tíos, parientes enfermos con cáncer, o que han muerto con cáncer, o que saben que en los próximos meses o años van a morir con cáncer. ¿Qué calidad de vida o qué condiciones de vida podemos llamar a esa situación? La realidad es muy dura y los pueblos y nacionalidades indígenas que son los dueños ancestrales de esas tierras igualmente han perdido sus medios de vida y su cultura. Y eso tiene que ser reparado por la compañía que la causó, en este caso por Chevron. Esta lucha ha tenido un primer éxito, el 14 de febrero de 2011, cuando obtuvimos la primera sentencia, gracias a la lucha de las comunidades y el apoyo de mucha gente de fuera del país que han contribuido económicamente para sostener esta lucha. Pero esta lucha no ha terminado con la sentencia. Tenemos que ejecutar la sentencia para poder cobrar lo que la justicia le ordenó a Chevron que pagara para reparar los daños. Pero en vez de pagar, está persiguiendo a los dirigentes, a los demandantes y a los abogados, entre ellos Steven. Por lo tanto, esta lucha continúa porque la persecución contra Steven no es solamente a Steven como persona, es a un proceso histórico, es a la gente que ya ha muerto con cáncer. Es algo increíble que una compañía que tiene muchísimo dinero y que ha hecho tanto daño no pueda cumplir con una sentencia de un país soberano como Ecuador. Por eso es importante sentar precedentes para que no vuelva a suceder en ninguna otra parte del mundo, ojalá, lo que pasó aquí en la Amazonía ecuatoriana. Pero eso será posible si es que ciudadanos, hombres y mujeres de los Estados Unidos, de muchos países, se unen a esta lucha, haciendo contribuciones económicas o de cualquier otra manera para unir esfuerzos y ganar y cobrar a esta compañía para reparar lo que destruyó acá en la Amazonía. De Steven, yo y muchas otras personas hemos aprendido, como también él ha aprendido mucho de nosotros, de la gente, la cultura. Entonces ha sido una interrelación mutua muy productiva para la lucha. Gracias a esa interrelación nos hemos fortalecido y eso ha hecho posible de que logremos la sentencia. Pero claro, eso fue el primer paso. Esperamos de que Steven pueda estar libre pronto para que el equipo pueda continuar esta lucha hasta que Chevron pague para reparar el daño que ocasionó en el Ecuador. Creo que la lucha es colectiva. Steven, el equipo legal, los líderes históricos, los nuevos líderes, los líderes de base, la gente afectada y también la gente que nos ha apoyado a lo largo de estos años fuera de Ecuador. Y esta unidad tiene que mantenerse para ahora, primero para obtener la libertad de Steven y luego para continuar la lucha hasta que Chevron pague.
Some extraordinarily powerful testimony there. And by the way, I just wanted to say, guys, we see you in the super chat, Valerie Stewart and Jean Headley and Mike and all of you guys, Lord and Connie, all of you guys who are giving money there that's going to go to Stephen's Legal Defense Fund. And we could not have, thank you enough for your contributions. It means so, so much and is going to help enable him to continue this fight. We have another fantastic guest we want to bring in, Lucy Lawless. She's a New Zealand-born actress. You guys might know her as Xena, the Warrior Princess. But even more important, in my opinion, than that is she's an incredible activist, an incredible humanitarian, and actually traveled to Ecuador to meet with people and to view the area of this mass poisoning and dumping. So welcome, Lucy. We're so glad to have you.
Hi, womenfolk. Delighted to share a virtual stage with you. I met Stephen, and to meet Stephen is to kind of just love him because what he's about is so pure and so dead on, and he's suffered a lot. He's suffered a lot to do what's right, and his family have suffered a lot because they try to paint him as somebody who's hiding assets or something, but it's absolute poppycock. This guy has lost everything to do what's right by the people of Lago Agrio. So anyway, I went there, and just to set the scene, you arrive in Quito, and it's this World Heritage Site with very famous square with 16th and 17th century buildings, and everything's pretty quaint. And then you drive 4.5 hours over the Andes, and it's not like the Andes where you crash your plane and have to eat the goalkeeper. It's kind of lower. It looks a bit more like New Zealand, actually. And it's right on the equator, so it's jolly hot. And you get out into the area that is called Lago Agrio, which was, I think Paul said, created in the 60s by Texaco to, set up all the infrastructure and things that they needed on site for the oil company. And I visited the communities there of La Primavera, San Carlos, Xuxufindi, and met the locals and found such warm, intelligent, quite poetic human beings, and very tough, very staunch. But when I asked Juan Carlos, in his darkest moments, what are his feelings? And he broke down because he said it's like a monster that lives beneath them all the time, that they're waiting for their children to be picked off because, 3 out of 4 kids is born with this horrible rash in this area. And there are such things as nervous system disorders and stomach cancer, uterine cancer, very young. I met a couple of young women, both of them had lymphatic cancer. And all of this comes from drinking and living around polluted water. So the settlement if it was ever paid, is only going to go to clean up the ponds that are the 1,000 ponds, which apparently cover an area the size of Manhattan. That money will barely go to remediate that land so that future generations will not suffer these nervous system disorders, these horrible skin conditions, spontaneous abortions, all manner of cancers. They're not even asking for damages for the people who have suffered horribly. And they've not only lost their lives and their health, but they've lost their way of life, their fishing, they used to be fantastic fish farmers, right? They've been doing it for thousands of years. They know how to do these things. And they could grow their own produce. So before Chevron bought the promise of jobs, they kind of didn't need jobs because the land provided. They were working for their own existence. Do you know what I mean? In what they described as a paradise. So what the jobs and the prosperity has not transformed into any kind of wealth that you can see. You just see hideous pipes for hundreds of miles along the roads, and you see sick people, and you see whorehouses, which have been shut down by COVID, but no doubt will be back. I mean, this is the kind of prosperity and jobs it brings. Terrific opportunity for women, and in fact, the men, in my experience, what I saw is that the jobs are, because labor is so cheap there, they have very low-grade equipment. So they'll have 3 men to do a job that 1 man in America might do because it's clunky, outdated technology that they're using. And it's just, they're really low-grade jobs, you know. It hasn't filtered into any kind of prosperity for the people. In fact, the opposite. It's impoverished them beyond all measure. It's incalculable, their loss.
Isn't actually going toward paying for the damages. It's going to restoration for the future, because so often people see these big numbers and think that this is an overreach. We had, the whole 90s, people were consumed with the idea of tort reform, but the reality is these judgments come few and far between, and usually the judgments are very inferior. I'm curious what, from your perspective, it's like to go and visit a place like that, to see the consequences of what Chevron has done, and then to return to your own community, to the entertainment community, and try to tell people about what's going on, because we've heard so much about the consequences of journalists who've tried to talk about these issues. I'm curious whether you've received any similar kind of pushback from the entertainment community, or whether or not this case has fallen on some open ears, hearts, and minds.
I have not been in the entertainment community. I mean, I live in my head in quite an activist world, and besides, the entertainment community tends to skew towards people who are very open and feel a lot of connectivity with human beings around the world. So I doubt that I will experience negative discrimination from that, though being considered a big mouth on the side of environmental politics might, I don't know. You know what? I don't even give a shit. Who cares? Just do the right thing. The time is so short for the planet that all this fear of trying to protect ourselves and protect our names and protect our careers or whatever is appalling to me. And there's so many very much more influential people than me out there. I wish there was. I wish sports people would get on board. But anyway, we've got to free Donziger, because, as you all said, this is like the plug that's holding in the eruption of the volcano. And if you get Donziger out, then you're going to release possibly the judgment for the people of Lago Agrio. Then that's going to bring down the house of cards of Chevron, which is why they're fighting so hard and why it justifies them destroying an innocent man, because they know that they have many billions of dollars of judgments extant already in the world, let alone things which have not yet been dealt with. So, it starts with Donziger. We've got to get him out, seek justice, and save American justice at the same time, because this is a horrible indictment of the loss of the executive. They're usurping the power of the executive, right? If a corporation can now go around the rules and go around all norms, flout all norms in order to push their own agenda and punish detractors or punish lawyers who have successfully prosecuted them, then every other extractive industry is licking their chops at the prospects of just open slather on the planet and its resources.
I think that is all.
Well, that's why they have been so vicious towards Stephen. More than 2 years of house arrest with that ankle bracelet on, the conditions of the prison where he is, with people serving time for some of the harshest crimes. He will have a lot to say about that when he gets out. You know, the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights has condemned this case. They have called him a political prisoner. They have spoken of his human rights abuse. They've said that he should be freed and also compensated. And I think that's very, very important, because the United States, of course, likes to think that we make a stand for human rights. And we want to make sure that President Biden hears from us in any way possible. Lucy, you're with a bunch of big mouth women tonight, so I hope you feel very much at home. And I would like to think that the women of the United States would have some things to say to our president, that if he wants to make a stand for human rights in the world, he should start right here at home, and it could begin by commuting the sentence of Stephen Donziger. So I just have great admiration for you, that you went there and that you speak as you do and tell us a very human story, which can only be told by someone who has seen it firsthand. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now we have, for an update on the case and where things stand from a legal perspective, Ron Kuby. He's a criminal defense and civil rights attorney. He's represented a lot of notable clients, and it's been said he is a prosecutor's worst nightmare. And he also represented Stephen in his trial before Judge Preska. Welcome, Ron. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Our pleasure.
Ron, we've heard a little bit already about how we got to this point, but more recently, we had this hearing where we got another little taste of exactly why people are characterizing this prosecution as biased. Can you tell us what the evidence is? What is it that we've seen that makes us feel like we have these two New York judges that have a vendetta out against Donziger? What kind of things have we been seeing in the courtroom that lead us to that conclusion?
You know, I don't say lightly that the system is fundamentally unfair or that the result is preordained. That's not something I tend to do, but I have never seen anything like this case in now almost 40 years of practice. Go back to 2010, Chevron went to the Obama Justice Department and asked them to prosecute Stephen Donziger. They refused. They said, no, you know what, we're not in the business of taking care of Chevron's legal problems. Thank you so much. And they said no. They then engaged in this long history of abuse of discovery processes. And ultimately, Judge Kaplan held Donziger in contempt of court for refusing to turn over his computer, which contained all of his attorney-client materials, all his contacts with his clients, phone numbers, contact information, locations, things that he swore to his clients that he would never reveal to anybody. So Stephen does not abide by that order. And then Judge Kaplan not just holds him in civil contempt, but also holds him in criminal contempt. Very rarely done. It happens. Very rarely done, though. And then Kaplan goes to the Justice Department. This is now the Trump Justice Department, and says, now prosecute Donziger. And the Trump Justice Department says, no. And they say, we don't have the resources to do this. You know, which is like the most blatant lie you can imagine. The Justice Department has all the resources it needs to do whatever it wants to do. So then Judge Kaplan brings charges himself for Stephen's violating the order. Okay, so Judge Kaplan is the aggrieved party. Judge Kaplan also brings the charges. Then Judge Kaplan appoints a prosecutor. And he appoints a prosecutor with deep ties to the oil and gas industry. And a prosecutor whose law firm previously represented Chevron, right? Chevron, huh? Of all the former prosecutors you can find, you happen to find one who used to represent Chevron. And he appoints a legal team at taxpayer expense. Probably the bill is now run close to $1 million. Okay, that's bad. But wait, it gets worse. Then Judge Kaplan, instead of just sending the case out for random selection, specifically handpicks Judge Loretta Preska, a very important member of the Federalist Society and somebody who shares Kaplan's corporatist agenda. He handpicks her to hear the case. And just in case something could possibly go wrong, he remains on the case as a judge. So to summarize, for the folks at home who may not have been keeping score, Judge Kaplan is the aggrieved party. Judge Kaplan is a witness. Judge Kaplan is the guy that brought the charges. Judge Kaplan is the guy that picked the prosecutor. Judge Kaplan is the guy that picked the judge. And Judge Kaplan is also the judge.
Wow. And isn't the whole point of appointing a prosecutor here to create distance between the person who's the aggrieved party and the person who's prosecuting the contempt charge?
What do I say about that?
Yes.
Right.
Very good.
and yet here we are. So, all of this then hangs on this contempt charge, which is hanging on the fact that Donziger hasn't turned over his privileged confidential attorney-client information, which should be the expectation that no one would turn it over for any attorney who had been practicing at all, right?
Correct.
So this is something hanging on a thing that's hanging on a thing that's hanging on a thing. And yet, recently, there was this colloquy I heard you speaking about in which the prosecutor was asked whether or not if Joe Biden himself called into the courtroom and said, stop prosecuting the case, they still equivocated on whether or not they drop it?
They did. So the case is on appeal to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. And like most appeals courts, they have absolutely no interest in Stephen Donziger as a human, no interest in his situation, which is pretty bleak, and not a lot of interest in the details of the case. What they're fascinated by is a little-known portion of the Constitution called the Appointments Clause. And I will not begin to explain it because it just is something that everybody in law school sleeps through.
I don't remember it.
Yeah, no, and for good reason. But fundamentally, the question is, if you have somebody who's going to exercise executive power, that is, the power to prosecute people, subpoena witnesses and call witnesses to the stand in the name of the United States of America, and that person is not confirmed by the Senate of the United States, then that person has to be supervised by somebody who has been confirmed by the Senate of the United States. It's one of the lesser known checks or balances. It's simple enough. We have federal prosecutors. They're accountable to their bosses, who are ultimately accountable to the Attorney General, who was confirmed by the Senate. In this case, the prosecutor has always taken the position that she's not accountable to anyone, and even took that position in the Court of Appeals when they pressed her directly. All she would say is she would inform the court of, the phone call, and she would seek to be relieved of the case. But she never said, yes, of course I would walk away if the president and the attorney general got on a conference call and fired me.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah, no, it's bad.
And Ron, obviously the charges against Stephen were complete bullshit, as Briahna just laid out. This idea that, he was withholding his laptop when his laptop had all these privileged communications. But even if he was guilty, has there ever been an instance of a lawyer serving 6 months in prison on top of 2+ years of home confinement for what basically amounts to, a dispute over the discovery process?
No, not even close. Lawyers typically who are held in for criminal contempt don't face any form of pretrial restraint at all. And Stephen has not only earned the most pretrial restraint in the history of this country, but he's also earned the longest jail sentence for an attorney found guilty of contempt. So he holds multiple records.
Paul Guinness.
Ron, how is this not basically a political show trial? And doesn't this loophole, the very fact that it exists, create the possibility of other such political show trials in the future? Is there anything we can do to close this?
Well, I think just as a legal matter, one of the things that's happened in Stephen's case is because this power is used so rarely, there's seldom much attention that's paid to it. It's used in the obscure corners of the law. It's never been used in a case quite this high profile. And a lot of people are beginning to ask the question as to whether judges should have this power this way. There are at least 2 United States senators who have raised questions about the way the prosecution was appointed. So we'll see what ultimately happens. Certainly the appellate decision that we're waiting for could very well be the thing that puts an end to this practice. But it was a show trial. And the outcome was absolutely preordained from the beginning. I could not have done a worse job in terms of outcome, since he got convicted of everything and got the maximum sentence. But we all knew that was going to happen. We just tried to make sure that we put on the show that we wanted to put on. Get those corporate lawyers on the witness stand, talk about the way they spend $3 million of Chevron's money to allegedly recover $813,000 from Stephen Donziger and never got a penny. Those kinds of things, the outrageous billing, the tremendous amount of energy spent for no apparent purpose other than demonizing Stephen Donziger.
Yeah. And finally, Ron, we have people contributing to freedonziger.com. We also have them giving in the super chat right now of the live stream. That money's also all going to be donated. I'm going to shout out a few names here. Thank you to Patricia. Thank you to Hoodwinked. Thank you to Trista, ID8 or Jilperman. And there's all kinds of people who are giving money in the super chat and hopefully going to freedonziger.com as well. But what would you ask people to do from an activist perspective? Is it call Merrick Garland? Is it call their congressional representative? What should they do? What should they say? What's the script?
I mean, all of those things would be worthwhile. Ask the president for a commutation. Write to the attorney general. Go to your members of Congress and ask, why is this man in this prison for these offenses for this period of time, and demand some sort of action. All of those things are as worthwhile doing as anything else. I have no expectation, given what I've seen of the Biden Justice Department, that much is going to happen. But I always have hopes, if not expectations. And I do want to say one last thing, if I might, grab some time from the next person. Stephen's case is remarkably complicated legally. I mean, it goes back decades and decades in some of the most advanced process that most lawyers have never encountered in their lives. And it's easy to look at the case in retrospect and say, wow, gee, Stephen really should have filed a petition for writ of mandamus at this point, so his collateral bar argument wasn't foreclosed. It's easy to find flaws with the way Stephen litigated the case. And hopefully law students and law professors are going to say, oh, look what happened to Donziger. Let's try to do this way instead of that way. But something that's fundamental is that from the very beginning, Stephen Donziger made the decision that he is not going to betray his clients. He drew that line, he adopted that principle, and he stuck with it. And in an era where people's principles end up, as disposable as their compost, the fact that Stephen Donziger gave up his law license, gave up his freedom, walked into jail when he didn't have to, because he was not going to violate a promise that he made to the people that he cared about. I mean, that's a totally admirable thing. And if law students and young lawyers take away anything, it's figure out what your principles are, before you walk into the courtroom and live them, because that's a very real form of solidarity.
Very well said. Hey, Ron, thank you so much for your time, for laying it all out for us. Thank you for your work on this case.
Take care.
I want to thank you guys again for all the contributions that are rolling in. We see them right in front of our eyes. I know Stephen would be incredibly grateful. We want to shift a little bit to the lack of media coverage of this case. I mean, it was incredible. All of us doing what we could, interviewing Stephen, talking about it, doing segments on it, everything we can. And I think finally, after he was already in prison,
Right.
Jake Tapper does one segment on it, Katie.
Yeah, Lawrence O'Donnell did something the other day.
I mean, look, they got rid of Chris Cuomo, too, a little bit late, but, better late than never, I guess, right? So they get to Stephen Donziger's case after he's locked up.
Well, how many television shows do you watch where Chevron is advertising?
Oh, right, of course,
I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly it. And then, it's too easy also because of who Stephen was representing, who he was fighting for, people who don't have a lobbyist here in this town, who aren't getting invited to the fancy holiday parties that everybody's going to right now in D.C., it becomes very easy to ignore them and pretend that none of this is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that Jake Tapper did a segment on me flubbing a Bloomberg fact before he ever covered Donziger. Jake, I'm Old Birdie 2020 Michigan.
I forgot about that. That's right.
You're the reason.
I have not.
That was unforgivable, Briahna.
I'm
You can take
sorry.
this moment to apologize if you'd
I'm
like.
sorry for saying that he had a heart attack instead of a stent replacement. My bad. I'm officially sorry, but not sorry for covering Donziger.
We'll think about forgiving you.
We're going to scratch the free Donziger and make it a free Bree stream.
All right, next up to talk about the media, someone who is expert in this as well is someone you guys probably all know really well, David Sirota. He's, of course, a regular with all of us. He's also Bernie 2020 alum who can share some of those war stories as well. And the founder of Daily Poster, and has a podcast, and has, no big deal, a movie coming out with like every actor that you've ever heard of in your entire life. David, great to see you.
Good to see you. It's been a busy year.
Yes, indeed. You have certainly had a busy year. So just weigh in on the discussion we were just having. What is it about this case that made the media just decide they were just gonna pretend it didn't exist whatsoever?
I think a couple things. I think there's a lot of details to this case. So if you want to cover it, you have to not be lazy. You have to take the reporting seriously. You have to take the details seriously. I think that, unfortunately, in our current society, a lot of journalism doesn't really want to question a powerful industry and a powerful company like Chevron. This case is about Chevron dealing with one of its critics. So I think the message that this case is designed to send on Chevron's behalf is, don't question companies like Chevron. Don't question the oil industry, because there will be consequences if you question or challenge those industries. So I think those two things, the idea that it takes work to actually report on this, it's not an easy story to report on, and there is an additional implicit threat of consequences for reporting on this. I think that's deterred a lot of journalism on this, even though it is such a landmark case. And I think that can't be overstated, how important and precedent-setting this case is. This case is designed to send a larger message way beyond Stephen Donziger, to send a message to anyone and everyone, activists, journalists, regular citizens, to send a message that you should not try to ask tough questions of the oil industry. Do not try to challenge the power of the fossil fuel industry, because there will be hell to pay if you do that.
And David, can you talk about the conflicts of interest at stake here? I mean, why is it so easy for these media companies to ignore stories like this, and what kind of hold does Chevron and the fossil fuels, larger fossil fuel industries have on the media?
Well, look, I mean, we know that Chevron funds all sorts of, through sponsorships and the like, all sorts of media. I mean, you can look no further than the Washington gossip sheets that are quote unquote presented by Chevron. I mean, there are Washington news outlets where at the top of the news of the day it says presented by Chevron. So I think corporate media as a whole knows who its paymasters are. And so messing with its paymasters is just not something that corporate media is always or typically looking to do. Now, that's not to argue that that media outlets are getting orders from specific companies, but it is to say that industries know who is paying their salaries, and Chevron throws a lot of money around. It also throws a lot of campaign contributions around. So Chevron is known as a major corporate player. Also, the conflicts of interest within the case. I mean, you've got Chevron ties to the private law firm that was essentially appointed by the government to prosecute this case. And this is the thing I think a lot of people don't really fully understand about this case, which is why this case is so important. The power to incarcerate people has typically been exclusively the power of the democratically, small d, democratically elected government. We elect prosecutors, we elect governors, we elect federal officials who then appoint prosecutors. That the prosecutorial apparatus, the power, the ultimate power to put people in jail, has resided in the hands of the people. That's part of the democratic society. But what's happened in this case is the prosecutors of the people, the Southern District of New York, as an example, decided not to prosecute Steve Donziger. And then an appointed judge appointed a private law firm, essentially gave a private non-democratic entity, a private corporate law firm, the power of the state to incarcerate Chevron's biggest critic. That's what's so terrifying about this case. That's what's so terrifying beyond the human rights violation, I would argue, that Steve Donziger faces. This is a threat against everybody, saying that the government is willing to put that sacred power in the hands of a private entity to go after the critic of a private corporation.
And I think there's there's a class element to this as well, because Stephen Donziger went to Harvard Law. He was at Harvard with Obama.
Yeah.
Okay, he's had the world of law as his oyster. Could have gone out there and made millions of dollars doing any sorts of soulless things that Briahna could also have done had she chosen.
He decided to do that post-presidency.
Yeah, exactly. But Donziger, in a very real way, he was a class traitor. And so he went out and represented poor people in Ecuador rather than taking that easy path to, riches and the nice life. And in a sense, he's also being punished for being a class traitor in that way, which I think is a part of the element of why the media is a little uncomfortable with this story.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, Steve Donziger, his profile is unorthodox. I mean, he is what the corporate establishment doesn't want people to come out of elite law schools to use their skills and their powers for. So I would agree with you. I mean, people with that pedigree often go into defending the establishment, defending corporate power. He broke from that. And I think you're right. That is seen. It's seen as blasphemy. It's seen as apostasy. And I think the kind of media elite has trouble forgiving him for that.
I think actually that there are a lot of human rights activists and a lot of human rights lawyers and environmental activists working hard every single day. And I think it's because so many are active, because the fossil fuel companies are seeing the activism of people such as 100,000 people outside COP at Glasgow, that they have decided to use this case as a very loud message. Just like, I'm old enough to remember the assassinations of Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King. That was a very loud message to an entire generation to go home and leave the public sector to whoever wanted to control it so badly they were willing to kill in order to do so. This is a loud message to all of us, including many, many human rights activists and environmentalists out there. I think, Briahna, you had already talked and Ron had talked about the lawyers who know how important client-attorney privileges, that when you're talking about environmental activists in Ecuador, what it would have meant to let Chevron know who they were, what the names are, where they live. But every single activist and every single environmentalist from now on, and all of us just as citizens, seeing the viciousness with which Chevron has come after Stephen, it is already having the desired result, which is why it's so important that we're here. All of us could now say, I don't know if I want to go that far, because we know what they do. And that's why it's so important that Chevron sees all of us here now. And I hope all of you who are watching will just, it's like I often feel, women are told that if you're mugged in a back alley, just start yelling. Just start yelling. We have to just keep yelling about this. Use your feeds, use your Instagram, use your Twitter, use your TikTok, use your whatever you're on, and don't stop talking about it. Be the big mouths that we're certainly trying to be, that Lucy Lawless is. Obviously, give money, freedonziger.com, but give your voice to this. And I got to tell you, when you talk about this unholy relationship, this undemocratic with a small d relationship between government and corporation in this case, that is the essence of fascism. That is the essence of fascism. This must stop now. We must respond to this now. And that's why I'm so glad to be here with my friends and with all of you.
Yeah, and David, a lot of people have rightly made a lot of noise about fascism over the past couple of years. And some of those same people, especially media types, on this case, nowhere to be found.
Yeah, I mean, this is the example of it, the fusing of private power and state power. I mean, that is what this case really is and really is all about. And you're right, it's still off the radar. I mean, I think it's more on the radar now because Steven Donziger is in jail, and I think there was kind of like a little bit of a, I can't believe this is happening. This someone's going to intervene and stop this, and guess what? Nobody intervened and stopped this. And so I think there was kind of there was a lot of folks expecting that somebody would fix this, but no one's going to fix this unless there's a demand.
Yeah. And I think also we should, for those who identify with the Democratic Party, when you look at something like the UN, United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, speaking as it has in this case, and our president and a Democratic administration ignoring that. If the Trump administration ignored the United Nations like that, we'd all be like, oh, how terrible Trump is. We really have to get it in our minds. So many things that started with Republicans, but Democrats have not stopped. And at this point, the quietude on the part of a Democratic administration about this is something none of us should be happy about, and all of us should be talking about.
Yeah, it says everything. David, thank you so much. Thank you for the work
David,
you do.
Thank you.
You do such a great job highlighting issues like this that other people aren't talking about.
Everyone read the Daily Poster.
Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
And his great reporting on it. David has done amazing reporting on this, by the way.
Oh, I mean, listen, David actually at the Daily Poster focuses on the real issues that make things happen in this town. Relentlessly focused on money, exposing, I mean, you brought up the way that Chevron is the paymaster of so many of these companies sponsoring, Politico Playbook. He's all over that kind of reporting. And if you're not following the money and the power trail, then you're not going to understand what's happening in this case or anywhere else in this town. So, guys, if you're able to subscribe to the Daily Poster, they do incredible work.
I think that's just the commentary on independent media and why it's so important today. When you look at the corporate conglomeratization of the media, it's no different than the corporate conglomeratization of the fossil fuel companies or big pharmaceutical companies or anything else. It's all one big corporate matrix, and they scratch each other's back, and they partner with each other. And nobody can say today, sometimes people say, well, I just don't know all the facts. But between Briahna and you, Krystal, and
what am I,
people
like
no, you're not
Marianne.
and you, Katie, and people like David Sirota, you can't really say today that the facts aren't there. They are there, they're available, and it's our responsibility as citizens to know the facts and to articulate them as best we can.
You see that weaponized too, not just on this issue, but you see it around climate change, you see it around police reform, where the complexity of it is weaponized to paralyze people.
Yep.
Right?
But I think what's important is that it's not as complex as they want you to think.
It's
not so complicated.
That's it, exactly.
Short-term profit maximization for these huge corporate entities is the bottom line. That's the simple truth. It's the simple truth we need to be clear about.
But there's also this institutional problem that happens with journalism where journalists are not, for the most part, very well paid. They're on very short deadlines. Half of them are being pushed to write these 10 blog posts a day. And then you're confronted with an issue like this where you have to basically teach yourself all these legal complexities, dig into decades worth of history. And having been in that position, I was lucky enough to be at an institution at The Intercept where I had the time and space to do those sorts of things. 9 out of 10 journalists don't, even if they're so inclined. And so many of these people, they don't also feel so confident and empowered to become the experts.
That so many people would be absolutely up in arms over if it happened under Trump. They'd be calling it fascism. They'd be calling it, everything we are supposed to fear from Trump. And because this happens under Biden, what's up, Merrick Garland? I thought you guys were down with the rule of law. I thought you guys were the smart guys who went to Harvard.
Well, it
Why
reminds me very much of the continued prosecution of Assange.
Julian Assange.
Absolutely. It is very much like the prosecution
under
of Assange.
Obama, the Obama people, they wanted to go after him, believe you me.
Right,
but they looked at the law and they said, we don't know how we go after Julian Assange and don't also implicate
the New York
Times, the Guardian, everybody else. So they said, we're not going to do it. Trump took with Bill Barr, took a very aggressive stance. I mean, first they considered assassinating him. Yeah. And then they took the quote unquote moderate route of prosecuting him in what is an all-out assault on journalism. And the Biden administration has gone right along with it. They haven't said anything about it, but they have not changed course. They have de facto endorsed Trump's outrageous assault on Julian Assange. And it's the same thing here.
They've appealed the extradition decision.
And Julian Assange is at much greater risk than Stephen Donziger. Stephen Donziger will get out of prison, whether it's the entire 6 months or not. They want to they want to keep Assange in prison forever. And also we want to remember, in terms of journalists, the articles that used to get a journalist a Pulitzer Prize is liable today to get the journalist fired.
That's right.
Is the article that the editor would say, no, you're not allowed to do that, which is just a plug for independent media. And maybe some of those journalists out there, you don't have to go with a corporate guys if they won't let you do the job.
And
that you
speaking
know
of Pulitzer Prizes,
speaking of Pulitzer Prizes and people who are no longer welcome in mainstream media because of their truth-telling, Chris Hedges is our next guest. He is a Pulitzer Prize winner, former foreign correspondent and bureau chief in the Middle East and the Balkans for 15 years for the New York Times. He's worked for the Dallas Morning News, Christian Science Monitor, NPR, host of the Emmy Award-nominated RT America show on Contact. Great to have you, an incredible speaker, author, activist, journalist, Chris Hedges. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And we really are grateful for you taking the time. We were just having a conversation about the media that I think you could probably weigh in with some expertise on as well. And one of the things I was thinking about is, there's a class dynamic. There's the fact that Chevron is sponsoring some of these media conglomerates. But there's also the fact that it's much easier and more comfortable to punch down. It's much easier to pick out, the lady being obnoxious with not wanting to put her mask on or whatever. She's not going to have highly paid lawyers. She's not going to be running advertisements on your network. And so that's a lot easier and a lot more comfortable than actually laying out the facts of such an important and significant case as what's going on with Stephen Donziger.
Well, that's, of course, Glenn Greenwald's criticism of The Intercept, which I share. It is a lot easier to punch down. It doesn't cost you anything. And the fact is, corporate power for a long time has just been unassailable within corporate-dominated commercial media. So you go back and look at Seymour Hersh. He left the New York Times after he did a big investigative piece on Gulf and Western, which owned Paramount Pictures, and the Times just neutered it. And he walked out. He writes in his memoir, Reporter, which is a very good book, that was it. I realized that the mainstream media was just not going to take on corporate power. And you can look at the way the Times has failed to cover the Donziger case. And the fact is the Times had set up its own advertising company to create ads for their clients. So the clients would hire it's called T-Brand, and the biggest client is Chevron. So the Times just won't take on corporate power. That's not particularly new. I mean, if you'd read the business section of the New York Times in the months leading up to the 2008 financial meltdown, you wouldn't have had a clue that the meltdown was coming. They're completely in bed with corporate power. That's also true, of course, with the Democratic Party, which I find quite chilling, because what the Democratic Party is doing by refusing to distance themselves from corporate power is ensuring almost certainly the loss of the House and the election of either Trump or a Trump-like figure in 2024. The difference this time around is the vindictiveness, the fact that whoever comes into power will be on will have a policy who's.
Oh no.
Well,
More corporate media censorship.
I think it's the CIA.
Well, what's interesting about some of that critique is that I think both of us have recently interviewed Batya Ungar-Sargon about her critique of the media, which is that, it's become more elitist over time. It's been increasingly deciding that the metric by which it was going to make money was not going to be to sell papers to the working class at a penny a pop, but instead to cultivate this advertiser base where they can get much more money in advertising, and that changes the nature of the coverage. I think if I were to have one critique of that analysis, is that she doesn't emphasize sufficiently the extent to which all of these outlets, regardless of their political leaning, are aligned in the extent to which that they are in cahoots entirely with these elite interests. And it's not so much a partisan issue, but this top-down issue, which really begs the question, how do we get out of it? We're not going to be able to vote our way out of that kind of media capture. And of course, it's very heartening to be on a panel with all of you ladies who have broken through an independent media in the way that you have done. But it's also incredibly dispiriting to see even someone like Chris Hedges, who's been marginalized in the way he has, despite
Can't even get good Wi-Fi.
Get good Wi-Fi.
I think we have him back, though. There he is.
There he is, you see? Fight the
right.
power.
I'm not even on Wi-Fi. I have an Ethernet cable, so I don't know what happened.
Oh my God.
Oh,
So,
wow.
They
That's
really,
deep state,
that they were interfering, yeah.
I mean, Chris, do you think that it's gotten worse? Like with the New York Times from the time that you were there till now? Are these the same sort of problems that you saw when you were there? And then to Briahna's point, is the answer independent media? Is it changing the business models? Is it boycotts? What do you think that are some possible
It's always been
solutions?
independent media. So I write now for Scheer Post, run by Bob Scheer, who was the editor of Ramparts magazine, a magazine that never made any money. Bob has a special knack for never making money, but did serious journalism, exposed COINTELPRO, published that iconic photo of the little girl running naked down the road in Vietnam, burned by napalm, which, a lot of people don't know, but King was at an airport with Ralph Abernathy and opened up Ramparts and saw that picture and pushed his food away. And Abernathy said, "Is there something wrong with your food?" And King said, "Nothing's going to taste right until I denounce this war." It came at that moment. So the whole coverage of the debacle in Vietnam, the alternative non-commercial press has always shamed the traditional press into doing their job. And that's exactly what Julian Assange did. Julian, there was always a deep animus towards Julian. But Julian, to not publish that material would have exposed the complicity of the establishment press with the power elite. And that's why, of course, once they took that material from Julian and WikiLeaks, they turned on him. And it has been part of the effort to, Bill Keller began it almost immediately in this horrible column about how Julian smelled. And it's just terrible. So there's always been that kind of tension. Is it worse now? Yes. It's worse now for a couple reasons. One, because of the corporate consolidation of media, it's no longer a media empire, but you have CNN, MSNBC, all this. They are owned by large corporations, and they are just one revenue stream competing against hundreds of other revenue streams. And their primary goal is that they have to make a profit. So Zucker was brought in from, I guess it was NBC. I don't have a TV, but where he had created a fictional persona of Trump to turn CNN into the kind of burlesque that it has become. But it's all number one. That consolidation has essentially turned media outlets or forced media outlets to be defined almost exclusively by their profitability, which has, of course, degraded journalism itself. And then secondly, and I saw you have in your background both Taibbi's book and Ed Herman and Chomsky's book, Manufacturing Consent. Both are great books, but Matt has kind of updated the shift in the media landscape, where instead of having a handful of powerful media conglomerates like three major networks that seek to essentially capture a disparate audience in terms of political views, you now have media siloed and catering to particular demographics, which is what I saw in Yugoslavia. I covered the war in Yugoslavia for the New York Times. And so you cater to that demographic and you demonize the other demographic. And that is as true for CNN and MSNBC as it is for Fox and Breitbart and everyone else. But that's very dangerous because you widen that kind of divide. You create alternative forms of reality. You make any kind of communication impossible. So yes, the media landscape is severely degraded from when I began as a young reporter covering the war in El Salvador in the early 1980s. And I would argue at this point, the electronic media, by and large, does almost no journalism. I mean, the Rachel Maddow and Chris Como and Wolf Blitzer, who got to start working for AIPAC. I mean, George Stephanopoulos. I mean, these people aren't journalists. I mean, every time you hear a discussion about wars in the Middle East or the intelligence community, they're vomiting up these retreads from the intelligence community, Clapper, Brennan, and they of course they're all sitting on defense contractor boards. So yes, the kind of corruption and the kind of decay within the media landscape, and going back to when I began as a journalist, is frightening and deep.
Yeah. And Chris, I mean, one of the things that I think about when I see how this story just sort of fell into a black hole in terms of media coverage, I do want to give credit. I think Lawrence O'Donnell did one or two segments over on MSNBC, and Jake Tapper, after Stephen was already in prison, decided that he would do a segment on this. It doesn't fit into that narrative of the thing that you should be most terrified of is, your uncle who has wacky political views, or if you're Fox News, the liberal who's coming to destroy your family and your school, or whatever their narrative is. It doesn't really fit into those storylines, which they're, desperately trying to hold on to try to juice their ratings and up their advertiser dollars. So they're not interested in it.
Well, I think we'd all agree on the bad news. We'd all agree on the world that's dying. But I think we need to remember the world that's struggling to be born. And it's also in evidence here. When I first heard about Stephen, started talking about him, nobody was talking about him. And now look at it. Look how it starts, how the energy has grown about Stephen. Look at all of the independent media. Look at the fact that we're here. And I think sometimes you don't see above the waterline yet the effect, but you can feel the energy of this revolutionary fervor that's happening now. And I think that we should all, Chris Hedges has prepared a generation of us to know what we know and to be saying what we're saying. So I don't want to just talk about the bad news. I mean, we're here. The fact that people are watching this, the fact that people are talking about Donziger and all of the other things that Chris has articulated and that we all articulate every day. John F. Kennedy said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. There's a revolution, and it's got to be a peaceful revolution, and to me, we're having it. So you mentioned the crucifixion, jump right to the resurrection. You mentioned the slavery in Egypt, but let's jump right to the promised land. And I think we are doing it. It's not even just we need to talk about it. Since we're doing it, I think we can be excited about it. And just Chris Hedges, I mean, you have prepared and informed and educated and articulated so much. And the fact that you lend your voice to this particular case for Stephen Donziger as such an example to all of us. And I think so many of us, because of what you have taught us, you and others, really know what to do with Stephen Donziger right now. And that is to have this line in the sand and push back against Chevron, just as our ancestors have pushed back against others in that time.
I agree. And I think that the collapse of the media is reflected in the opinion polls about the media, which has
exactly
very low approval ratings. I would say that the way to hit back is to build a boycott against Chevron, Texaco, and Caltex, which are the two gas oil distributors that Chevron owns throughout the country. I mean, nobody should be buying their gas there.
Yeah.
Okay, what are those two companies? What did he
Texaco,
starting here.
Chevron bought Texaco. So
But I thought
any
Texaco didn't even.
station, any Chevron station, or any Caltex station.
Those are
We
the
should not
brands.
be buying. And in fact, activists should be handing out flyers to people who do buy gas there, explaining the Donziger case.
I think that
Okay,
is-
so everybody hashtag boycott Chevron,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Chevron,
Hashtag-
Texaco, and Caltex.
Another thing we're asking people to do, Chris, and I want to recognize some of the folks who are giving in the super chat. We've got Jordan who just gave, Kristen, Nicholas says, I hope this doesn't bounce my rent check, guys. Don't bounce your rent checks,
Yeah.
but we do appreciate you. David, so many people are giving money to Stephen's Legal Defense Fund because, as we know, Chevron has tried to absolutely destroy this man. So you can either give through the super chat or through freedonziger.com. The link is right there. Chris Hedges, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thanks for doing it.
Thanks
Thank you
for
for
bringing awareness to this.
everything
Thank
that
you for
you
your, your work over many years.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Chris. Come back on soon.
All right, bye.
Bye. Wow, that's great, guys. This is great. It's great. I'm
Hero.
very-
People seem like they are.
I've seen.
You're
I had
into it.
Marianne and Chris on before. You don't get starstruck a lot. But
Wait,
you get
together?
A little, no, yeah, you get a little Chris starstruck, in a good way.
Well, I think he deserves the
I
kind
know
of-
He does
It's
deserve
but
it.
it's cool
deserves
because you
it.
don't
I mean,
get
this
starstruck.
is-
You I feel the View vibe already.
You know what
on the View now?
Right,
you know, the
Joy.
thing about Chris, I really admire a certain personality trait he has, which is that I am very much, my natural instinct is pleaser. Like, I'm always, gauging, is everybody good? Are they happy with me?
Yeah.
That he's like, some of the things that he's done that have made people so uncomfortable but have been so true and so right, I just so admire that because for me, it's a very uncomfortable feeling, and I feel like he just goes out. It's like Lucy Lawless, the big mouth thing. Like, she's like, I don't give a fuck. I'm just going to say what I need to say because life is short.
I
He
think
has
if
that
everything
quality.
you're saying is getting applause all the time, you're probably not saying the right stuff yet.
Yeah, I welcome their hatred.
Yeah,
That's it. That's it right there.
yeah.
If you're not inconveniencing somebody, and God knows a lot of the people we're talking about tonight need to be inconvenienced, including the President of the United States
Yeah.
on this issue. Let's not
Yeah.
forget that.
Oh, 100%, 100%. It really is egregious. And that's the other part of, the media conversation that if it was Trump,
Where's Trump? Yeah.
the conversation would be if the UN was calling out Trump in this
Oh,
way and
you know,
Amnesty
he's
International.
ignoring the
and-
United
Yeah, exactly.
Nobel
right.
laureates,
This is
they
a
know.
stain on our nation's history. This is a dark moment. It's all those things. It's just Biden happens to be president.
Yeah.
But
And
all the
so they
where's
have
the
nothing to say
apocalyptic
about it.
language?
Yeah,
Right.
Donziger said this was a litmus test for Joe Biden. And I think about
That's
that
well
as
said.
we have these conversations about how the Democratic Party is going to prove that Democrats should be in charge as we head into midterms. I think about that as we face down the possibility of another Trump-Biden matchup. And I think about all the ways that the environment in particular was used as a bully tool to get people to fall in line and go ahead and vote for Joe Biden. And if he continues to turn the other way when such egregious happenings like this are going on, as he ignores climate protesters, as he betrays so many of his climate promises, then he's going to have a very difficult case to make that the marginal incremental efforts that are being made right now, as we saw the slashes to the Build Back Better climate plan, et cetera, are going to be enough
May
to
not even
justify-
pass even that,
Right.
little-
quarter of the trivial 5% of what it needs
Right.
to be.
And I
May
say
not
this-
even pass.
Right. And
Written by Joe Manchin.
Right.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Right, and that's not an argument. That's not an argument against Joe Biden. So many people will say, "Oh, this is like you're a pro-Trump argument here because you want Joe Biden to fail." No, it's reading the tea leaves and saying you are going to be in the exact same position you were 4 years ago, making the case to people that the environment is the be-all, end-all, cataclysmic. You must vote blue no matter who issue.
Yep.
And if you won't even do what's necessary to save the environment from killing all of us and having the steamroll effect that we all know exists with climate refugees and all of the rest of it, well, then you're going to have absolutely no credibility at the ballot box.
It's using the language of World War II mobilization, existential threat, And then when you get in office, it's but the filibuster and the
The
parliamentarian.
guys,
it's really hard.
That is the parliamentarian.
It's really hard for Joe Manchin.
The part that's hard for me
exactly
to understand is what's been pointed out by Bree, just now pointed out by Chris. It's terrible politics.
Yeah.
There is now consensus on so much of the right as well as the left that we're being screwed by corporate America and by these huge multinational corporate entities. Whoever would claim that, Republican or Democrat, that populist fervor, and of course in 2016, that rising populist fervor was so obvious. And you had the authoritarian populist in Trump, and you had, of course, the progressive populist in Bernie, and it was the corporate Democrats that didn't want that language, didn't want that message put out there. But it is being put out there, and more importantly, it is being felt by the people who will vote accordingly in 2022 and 2024.
For better or worse.
For better or for worse.
That is right. I think we have some additional.
Yeah, we have some more. So I got to shout out. I got to say hi to my people. Can I just mention that? Okay. So hi everyone. Welcome to the Katie Halper Show.
Hi people.
The Katie Halper Show meets many more shows and many more co-hosts, and we're all coming together for the Stephen Donziger stream to free Stephen Donziger. And hello everyone, all my Katie Halper Show people. I see a lot of you donating to Stephen Donziger through the sub chat, so you are seen. And I did 2 more interviews that we're going to play little pre-taped clips from. But we also got a statement, the one member of Congress who has the strength and courage to make a statement for this stream,
Yes.
Chuy Garcia.
Super grateful for that.
Very grateful. He taped a message of support, so we're going to play that. But first, we're going to play a pre-taped message that, an excerpt of an interview that I did with Martin Garbus, who is one of Stephen's lawyers. Martin Garbus represented, as you'll see, Nelson Mandela, Lenny Bruce, Cesar Chavez, and not coincidentally, Stephen Donziger. So I spoke with him a bit about this case and why it's so important. Then we're going to go to Chuy Garcia. And then we're going to hear a little bit, just a smidgen from Roger Waters. You know him, you love him. And Roger Waters is someone else, major activist on behalf of Stephen Donziger, on behalf of Julian Assange, on behalf of Palestinians. And he has a message for us tonight as well.
Let's take a listen.
As a lawyer means that every day another motion is going to come in that you have to respond to. And on the other side, you have a law firm, Gibson and Dunn, and other law firms that are getting paid top dollar to represent them as they try and destroy Steve. So one of the differences here, let's say, when you're dealing with Chavez, you were dealing with farm workers in the middle of Bakersfield or Delano. Here you're dealing with the top law firms in New York, guys getting paid $750, $1,000, $1,250 an hour, and they have a blank check to run up as much time as they want. It's in their self-interest. Every single claim that they can think of, whether they win or lose, it's in their self-interest to do it. So if you're representing Steve as a lawyer, you can win 19 out of 20, or you can even win more. You can win them all, but it doesn't matter to the extent that Chevron has endless money that they're putting in this. And the prosecution is an example of the endless money. I would call it illegal money, but endless money that they're prepared to throw at Steve because his success would only, as they see it, would only invigorate and create other lawyers, other activists to fight on. And I think a lot of that's happened.
Hi, I'm Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia, and I represent the 4th District of Illinois. I'm honored to join this evening's event and to say it loud and clear from the halls of Congress, the Department of Justice must free Steve Donziger and hold polluters accountable. For now, Stephen's case exemplifies a pattern of systemic failure to bring corporations to justice for their abuses. Chevron avoids paying millions of dollars it owes and collects government subsidies, while indigenous people in El Ecuador continue to suffer the disastrous effects of living in a polluted environment. and Stephen, who fought to bring fossil fuel companies to justice for poisoning those communities, now sits in jail. He's imprisoned in the United States after Chevron's years-long smear campaign against him is an indictment of our justice system and an attack on fairness and accountability. And here's the thing. However horrifying this case is, it's not unique. Polluters like Chevron get away with their messes all the time, often much closer to home. Neighborhoods in my district and across the country suffered the effects of dirty air, toxic waste, and water contamination by corporate polluters. As is often the case, the areas most affected are in minority communities, in poorer communities. So environmental justice means holding polluters accountable to affected communities. That applies from the streets of Chicago to the Amazon rainforest. And Steve Donziger's release would be a small but mighty step toward a more accountable system. I urge the Department of Justice to heed the calls of the United Nations and human rights advocates everywhere and release Steve Donziger. Let's turn the page and begin a new chapter of environmental justice.
What do you want to tell people watching the stream December 8th? What's your message?
December the 8th, 2021, my friend Donziger has been in jail for a few weeks now, and thank goodness it's a 6-month sentence. Hopefully he'll get time off for good behavior because he is a good boy, Stephen. Send him letters if you can. He gets lots of letters because I've been in contact with him, and he reads them to his friends, newly made friends, and his communications. If you go to Support Donziger, one of those websites, you will see that the inpouring of love from the outside that's coming to him is sort of changing him in almost tangible ways. And also the fact that he has to, share a piss pot with 54 other men is changing him a bit as well. But he will come out of that experience stronger and with more fire in his belly to fight big oil, which is what he's been doing for the last 22 years on behalf of the rainforest dwellers in Ecuador. So give him all the support and send him all the love that you possibly can, and be ready to welcome him back into the arms of the many, because we are many and they are few when he comes out.
Super grateful for all those messages. We have seen a few members of Congress sending out words of support, but to have Congressman Garcia actually giving us a message and something that we could put on the live stream actually really means a lot, because, independent media is amazing and we have big audiences that watch all of these things. But if elites and people in the halls of power aren't listening, right, then ultimately, it's unable to have the impact that it needs to have. So that makes a big difference. Who are the other, you mentioned Rashida Tlaib, who are the other, there have been a few
Omar signed a letter. Many of them signed letters.
AOC,
but, everything that Krystal just said was the diplomatic, dignified, elegant way of saying, why the hell aren't those people here? I mean, we're sort of getting to the point.
Yeah. Fair.
Where, why aren't they here?
Well, and you see on the right,
they would be here.
They
would be
there.
They
the power
they
of their
work together.
Media. Yes,
right,
they do.
yeah, they do.
And on the left, they're like,
I know, they run from us. Just like the Democrats, they run from their base.
Women.
Then they run from their progressive.
We don't
run
fight.
from their progressive.
Often.
Yeah.
They get elected and they get
I don't fight. I really don't fight.
The one member who will go on all of our shows is Ro Khanna.
Yes.
It's true.
I give him credit for that.
It's
Even
true.
when
He takes
we
his licks.
have him on to yell at him about various things, he does show up.
There's no excuse for how
Did we
nice I
ask
am with him. I never push back.
Really?
We got a no on this?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't. Who
I
asked?
didn't
He
ask.
wasn't assigned to me.
Khanna.
Oh, I didn't
We
ask
dropped the
him
ball.
either.
So
Yeah.
Ro,
Ro
you're
got to
excluded
clarify
from the
that.
other
Ro probably
criticism.
would have come on.
He probably would have come on. One of my subscribers referred to him as a pain pig for being so willing to come on all of our shows all the time, which I kind of love. So he should come
He's
on
game.
and be a pain pig for us.
He's totally game for it. He listens to the feedback, and I'm grateful for that.
wonderful.
Even though,
Yeah.
certain instances we'd like him to,
Yeah.
all of them to push a little bit
Yeah.
harder. And that is a perfect segue to our next guest, who knows something about holding people's feet to the fire. The one and only incomparable Nina Turner. She, of course, was campaign co-chair for Bernie 2020. She is a podcaster and a hoster in her own right over at TYT, and, you know, someone that we all just absolutely love and adore and admire. Great to see you, Nina.
And it was her birthday yesterday.
Yes,
Happy
Oh,
belated.
damn, it was your birthday.
Yeah, you and Chomsky.
Happy birthday.
Nina and Chomsky. Noam and Nina.
Lots of great Sagittarian energy over here. Senator Turner, I want to open by asking you this question as someone who recently fought very valiantly to win a seat in Congress, who's been thinking a lot about the role that progressive Congress members can play if they do get elected. You know, what do you make of this list of people who have spoken out? But it's only, what, eight congressmen, 8 electeds total who've decided to weigh in on the Donziger case and sign this letter. What do you think the role of elected representatives should be in this moment?
Yeah, I think it was maybe 9 of them, Brie Joy. I was trying to keep up with it, but you know, I mean, out of the numbers that are in the Congress, very low. So yeah, shout out to the people, to the Congress members who did have the courage to sign that letter. And I'm really glad that you all are letting Congressman Rowe kind of off the hook here, because I think he would have shown up tonight. The role is to absolutely leverage the power necessary to bring justice. And as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, what affects one directly affects us all indirectly. That is indeed a truism, and it is a truism in this very moment. That is what is happening to our sisters and brothers and family and friends in Ecuador definitely impacts us, because the Amazon is what the lungs of the world. And the fact that Chevron, Texaco, you know, has been able to get away with this for almost 30 years now is really a stain on humanity. And so power is meant to be used because it's finite. You will not always have it. And what better way to come together to not only stand up for the people of Ecuador, but in standing up for them, we really are standing up for ourselves.
Why does it make so many of these elected representatives so nervous, though? Like, what are the concerns that you think that they're weighing to not speak out in the first place, to not want to show up here, even to send in a little statement that we could play or anything like that? Like, what are they weighing?
Well, Krystal, I'm not sure. I certainly don't want to try to get into their heads, but we know as a system, it is legal to bribe politicians in the United States of America. And so as you all have been having these conversations with your other illustrious guests and also among yourselves as women who are shaking the world right about now, which I am so proud, it really comes down to the owner-donor class, plain and simple. And so something this magnitude, I mean, Stephen certainly is a humanitarian for what he is enduring, for what his family is enduring. And I am so proud of all of the activists, all of the people who don't have the fancy titles, who have been right by his side every step of the way. And for him to be able to use the power and the privilege that he has to be a justice giant in this moment. But Krystal, really, this comes down to, and this is really simple. I want people to follow me. This is not complicated. Whose side are you on? Either you are on the side of justice or you are not. Either you are bought and paid for by the owner-donor class or you are not. Either you are willing to shake things up for something that has such an impact for us in our lives and then for future generations, or you are not. Whose side are you on? And I want to encourage people to get involved, to donate, even if you can't go to protest, even if you can only give $2, $5, $27, $127, whatever you can do, time, talent, and treasure. This is a fight of our lifetime, and we must not allow Chevron to win. You know, I was just thinking about the creation of the modern EPA, which was created in the 1970s. And I want to remind us, walking down, memory lane, the Cuyahoga River right here in my hometown was on fire because of pollution and neglect, and oil was floating on the top of it. It was impacted since the 1800s. And it was because the Cuyahoga River was on fire that the modern EPA, as we know it now, which needs to be revised a little bit, but the modern EPA, as we know it now, was born because that river was on fire. And why was it born? Not just because politicians decided they wanted to do the right thing, but it came from an activist spirit that pushed for the EPA to be birthed. And we are pushing for a new birth right now. And that is why we got to stand up and stand right by the side of Stephen.
And that new birth has to come not only from the activists, but also from these lawmakers. You know, one of the things that Howie Klein has made very clear to me, and Stephen has as well, I would say, well, this congressperson or that congressperson signed a letter. He says, Marianne, it can't stop there. When this letter was sent to Merrick Garland didn't even respond to these congresspeople. And then it just sort of died. You know, it's not enough to say that you're on the side of justice. It's not even enough to say you are concerned about the case against Stephen Donziger. I think it's time for some healthy shaming of certain people.
Oh, yeah.
Enough with it trying to get into their heads, as you said. It's like, why aren't they making more of a stand, including the fact that they could be here as you are, Nina, which is why we love you.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense.
I got some people to shame. Whenever you guys are ready, I have a list.
And we know that you would be here with us tonight, even if you had won your race.
Oh, absolutely. I would be there. And
I don't
whatever
think
else
anyone has a question about that.
Whatever else I can do to be.
But you got Stephen's own members of Congress who didn't respond to petitions, to letters that were sent there. Jerry Nadler, who has ties to Chevron or the fossil fuel industry. Gillibrand also didn't respond. These are the people who allegedly represent
Stephen specifically.
Yes, represent
Schumer.
Stephen. Schumer, where are these voices? Again, this is something, if this happened under Trump, I'd like to think that they'd be up in arms.
That's because the leadership of the Democratic Party is aligned with the corporatist agenda.
Well, sometimes it takes a Republican. I mean, to your point about the EPA, the EPA was passed under Nixon.
Exactly,
and I think that's not an accident. I think oftentimes the left, liberals broadly, are unwilling to put a fine point and name names and say exactly who is accountable when it's their own in office. So I'd like to see more people saying, it's also the fact that Joe Biden himself isn't being responsive to this. It is people like Chuck Schumer who aren't being responsive to this. And the feedback that you get when you say something like that on the internet and you say something specific about who the person in power is, and this is what I'm driving at every issue. All I want a guest to tell me is who's in control and what they can do about it. So then we can start saying specifically, you can't hide behind what we get so often in the media. The response from the Jen Psaki's, et cetera, of the world is, well, we did something. We sent out some COVID tests. You can get them reimbursed through your insurance, and that becomes a cover for doing what is within your full power as an executive. And so I really appreciate you bringing up that point, Senator Turner, because it is no accident that only when a Republican is in office do we seem to get the kind of traction necessary to get them to do something as meaningful as the EPA. And we can't let that power persist in the environmental context that we're in right now.
But Richard Nixon today would be seen as a far lefty.
Well,
he would.
That's what blue no matter who hath wrought.
I just want to make two important points, which is justice cannot wait until the opposing party is in power for us to stand up for it. If it's just to stand up for this under Trump, it's just to stand up for this under Biden. So that shouldn't matter. And then secondly, I want people to imagine if they were in the middle of an ocean drowning, which person or persons do you want to come and save you? Do you want the person who's going to parse out, who's going to be hurt if I come to save you, whose feelings, or do you want somebody to say, to hell with whoever, I'm coming out to radically save you, or if your house was on fire? Well, guess what? Our house, being Mother Earth, is on fire. The people of Ecuador have been transgressed. Stephen and other folks have stood up for these people. Now Stephen is in jail, in prison, paying the price for standing up for justice. And the least we can do is have the decency to call out people who ask for this power. Bree Joy, I'm right with you. It just boggles my mind how we are programmed to protect the people who have the most power and then look down our noses and tell the people who have the least power to wait for justice to come. It is unacceptable to do that. And I don't care who's in power. They need to use the power. So AG Garland, he needs to get on his job. The president needs to speak up and do something about this. And every member of Congress, whether they Democrat or Republican, should absolutely give a damn about what is happening, because you know what? That could be us in Ecuador right now. That could be us.
And it was
It's
people
Flint,
in Cleveland,
Michigan.
right?
Yeah,
And
it's
it
Flint,
continues
Michigan,
to be.
yeah.
Flint, Michigan. It was Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right.
I mean, you look in this
PFAS
country.
in New Hampshire, et cetera. It's not like environmental justice is exactly being done here right now. And also another thing that they pull a lot is, it's not politically feasible for them to do that. They might lose their job, as though they're the only people in the world who have to make ethical decisions at work. All of us could lose our job if we did the right thing. Right. Sometimes you just do the right thing, and if it means you lose your job, lose your job.
Well, and here's a name to name, Cedric Richmond, who is a senior advisor to the president, who, when he was a member of Congress, before he was appointed to that position, he represented an area known as Cancer Alley. Yeah. Why are the rates of cancer so high in his home district that he represented? Well, it's because you have lots of toxic pollutants going into the waterways and going into the air for those residents. And he never, when he was a member of Congress, they searched the transcripts, never brought it up on the floor of the House, never said a word about it. And now he's in a position
Has been promoted.
He's more power.
Now.
He's been promoted. That's exactly right.
Because he's been a good boy.
When we wonder, and of course he was also top recipient of all kinds of toxic polluters' money and oil and gas interests and all of that, well, he's rewarded for it.
And the New York Times, they'll remember with the Sunrise Movement said something about him, and they said something about him because they weren't excited. They thought he was bad for the environment. They were not excited that he was being named to the administration. And Jonathan Martin said that, going after the black staffer, the highest level black staffer from the get-go.
And don't forget, he was also on that call. He was also on that leaked Biden call where Biden,
civil rights leader?
all the civil rights leader, where he berated all of the black leadership in this country when they tried to raise some pretty low-key issues, not even, a big ask about George Floyd Act and other kinds of things that were demands for the black community. And it was, I think, really telling that Cedric Richmond was there in that role of, I think, playing mediator between people with legitimate claims on behalf of black people who, as you know, Senator Turner, are on the front lines of so much of these environmental catastrophes here at home. He wasn't there in a representative capacity to speak for the interests of anybody, most especially his own constituents in Louisiana, who suffer 7 out of the 10 most polluted air tracts in America are in his district. So he certainly wasn't there advocating for them or any other black interest. He was there to play the role of mediator and to protect Joe Biden from getting any of this kind of direct criticism. And enough is enough.
Well, my grandmother used to say you got to pay the cost to be the boss. Okay? So that means you need to, just common sense, you have to use that power to stand up against injustice. And there is an injustice here that impacts each and every one of us and all that we love in an entire ecosystem that cannot speak for itself. So it needs human beings to speak for it. So we must act and continue to put the pressure on and stand up for justice, no matter who is for or who is against. So let's get ready to rumble, baby.
Yeah, and with this case, it's not just about justice for those who are less powerful than anybody else, because what has happened to Stephen could happen to any of us.
The fact that he comes from, fancy law school and, has a privileged background just shows you.
As long as that loophole exists, we're all at risk.
No one is safe. And to your very salient point, Senator Turner, communities in America have been devastated by these intentional crimes that are committed by these giant companies. Why? Because they can get away with it. And Stephen is the perfect example of that, rather than Chevron, the polluter, having to have any sort of accountability, even pay $1 of restitution for the lives they have cost, the damage they have wrought, the devastation that will never be undone.
And still going on.
Stephen Donziger is in prison.
I mean, the world is upside down. I mean, this case is a great example of how make it make sense. It doesn't make sense.
It does not make sense.
Yeah, it's an inversion of what it should be.
It is.
But I think that there's an accumulation of recognition, people really getting that it is as bad as it is. And I think people getting that it's as bad as it is a prelude to people committing to making it what it needs to be. And I think that's happening right now.
Can I ask people to go and read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was put together in 1948 as a reminder of how we in the human family have an obligation to be each other's keepers. It is our obligation to do that. And this is something that can continue to bring this beautiful human family together to fight for this kind of justice, both at home and also abroad, because this is a human condition. This is a world condition. And this is the corporate estate. I mean, this is a prime example of the corporate estates of America, that there is no exaggeration that if something like this can happen to Stephen, as we have been saying, it can happen to anybody, but it is an illustration of who absolutely has the power and the control, who's expendable and who is not, who we should give a damn about and who we should not. And we're all impacted by this.
And in 1948, when Eleanor Roosevelt and others were so involved with that declaration, the good guys were winning. And right now, the good guys, what you were just saying was the consensus, not that it was always happening, but it was a consensus among the powers, certainly of Western civilization, that this is how it is supposed to be, that corporate power such as that should not have the hegemony that it does. Today, it's like you have to remind people that this is not the way it's supposed to be.
And that it's not radical to think that way.
No, it's theoretically Western liberalism.
Right. That's exactly right. Senator Turner, we are so grateful for your time tonight and the incredible moral clarity that you always bring to things and break the issues down to their most essential elements with your clarion calls for justice.
Also, I think it's worth noting. It's worth noting publicly, because I know we all feel it. They took you down, and the way you have risen right back up.
Oh, forget it.
Thank you
There's
for
no
what you have
stopping Nina
demonstrated.
Turner.
Yeah,
Come on.
seriously.
I love you all too. I get by with a little help from my friends. They gonna wish that I was in that Congress right now. Cause baby, Nina Turner Unleashed.
I know.
We hear you.
Comeback tour. You guys do the comeback tour.
We hear you.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
There you
2.0.
go. Love
Bye.
you too.
Love
Bye,
you
Nina.
too.
Thank you guys again.
Yeah, so great.
Oh,
She's so, it's so inspiring to hear from Nina Turner.
she just has
We
a way
need
of
a daily
really,
shot of Nina Turner.
She just
What'd you
has a way
say?
of
We need a daily
crystallizing
shot
things.
of Nina Turner.
Yeah.
She's just like, yeah.
Well, she's out there with her, if you get her newsletter, whatever.
Listen, she makes you really feel like things are possible. You know, I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's
And the
it's
power,
very
the strength
easy.
of character that she demonstrates.
Yeah, like you said, we know it's not even a question in my mind. If she had won that seat, she
Yeah,
would be
where she-
here.
yeah.
That's right.
She would not
That's right.
be
Yeah.
reticent,
That's right.
nervous.
Right.
Let me
No, not
balance
at all,
my
yeah.
campaign donors or
Yeah.
whatever the thinking is.
No way.
She'd be here.
Yeah.
No
So
doubt
that's
about
our
it.
way of saying that we hope she runs again, right?
And speaking of being here, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in, everyone for their super chats. And if you want to, by the way, everyone needs to be giving to freedonziger.com. Please, if you can, give to it.
Yes.
Also, if you do the super chats, I'm donating those super chats. You're not going to be funding this show. Although the Katie Halper show, people like it. Some people like the Katie Halper show. And
We love the Katie Halper
yeah.
show.
So I'm just inviting people for free. Not going to take any money away from this. But if you want to subscribe, you can support the show. Subscribe, just emotionally, morale level, support it, not financially. Just subscribe. It's free.
Morale
You hit subscribe, then you hit the bell. And the reason I'm saying this also is because I'll be releasing the full interview I did with Roger Waters, the full interview I did with Martin Garbus, and they're both really fascinating.
Also, there should be a shout out, a special shout out to Katie, because even though the four of us got together and knew we wanted to do something, it's Katie who has taken the reins and done all the administration and really made it happen. So,
Which may be why we
Katie
started
Halper.
15 minutes late. But yeah. No, thank you.
We
Yeah,
wanted
thank
to do it in your style.
Yeah.
In your trademark style. All right. But speaking of the great work that you did, we have two more guests that you helped to get on the schedule. We have Natalie Segovia. She's an international human rights attorney. She's currently legal director of the Water Protector Legal Collective. That's a nonprofit that grew out of that incredible resistance at Standing Rock. They provide legal support and advocacy for Indigenous peoples and original nations, the earth, and climate justice movements. And she also was on the team that represented Stephen during his appeal of Judge Preska's wrongful conviction before the Second Circuit. We also have Ali Jarrar. She's a campaigner with Amnesty International. She covers human rights issues in the U.S. and Canada. Based in Washington, D.C., she describes herself as an anti-imperialist feminist who believes that Stephen Donziger should be free. Amen. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
you know, Ali, we already talked about how the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights has spoken out. It was a loud statement on behalf of Stephen, and similarly, it was very loud when Amnesty International came out as loudly as they did. And you, of course, have been very instrumental in the project on behalf of Amnesty International. What specifically have you been doing, and what specifically can people do to aid the process?
Thanks for the question, Marianne, and thanks to all of you for having me join. I'm super amped up after hearing Nina Turner's talk. Well, you may or may not know that Amnesty International is a global human rights organization. We've got 11 million members worldwide, and we criticize every human rights violation in every corner of the earth, including the United States. So, like Marianne mentioned, there's a UN body, the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, that issued an opinion about the case of Stephen Donziger. We are in total agreement with all of its findings, which is that his detention was in violation of several norms related to fair trial. And also, there was very clearly a lack of independence and impartiality when it came to the judge. And of course, his deprivation of liberty appears to be in retaliation for his work with communities in Ecuador, which I know we've been talking about quite a lot. So at Amnesty International, we're extremely concerned about the case of Stephen Donziger, not just in the US, but all around the planet. Because as much as this is about Stephen himself and the fact that Stephen is currently incarcerated for all of these horrible reasons and experiencing these human rights violations, the US government has also been engaged in a pattern of targeting and harassing, surveilling, and prosecuting human rights defenders for many years now. So we've talked a little bit about corporate greed, lack of corporate accountability, but this is also about the US government going after people like Stephen for defending human rights. So at Amnesty International, we've been echoing the calls of Stephen's amazing support group. And for years, we've been tracking his case and speaking out and asking the US government about it. Most recently, we sent a letter to the Department of Justice with several other partner organizations that was very similar to the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention's opinion. You might not be surprised to hear that they didn't write back to us. And it's not just that they're not writing back to us, the biggest human rights organization in the world. As we talked about before, they're not even responding to Congress. It's really appalling. But we've also activated our members worldwide. We've issued an urgent appeal to our members across our global network to reach out to the Department of Justice and demand that they take jurisdiction over Stephen's case. Now, I work with Amnesty branches around the world, and I cannot even begin to tell you how shocked and confused they are by this concept of a private prosecutor. It is truly a bizarre anomaly to them. And we have seen that Stephen's case has really struck a chord with people around the world because we have successfully overloaded the inbox of 2 Department of Justice emails since sending out this appeal to our global network. And so we know that people are enraged. We know that they are inspired to action. And like Nina said before me, they are taking the side of justice. So what we want to encourage people to keep doing is writing to the Department of Justice, tell Attorney General Merrick Garland to take jurisdiction over the case. And you can do that very easily by going to the Department of Justice's website. There's a web form you fill out, and there's talking points both on freedonziger.com and on the Amnesty website. And so I encourage you to take that action, but also, like we heard earlier from Roger Waters, send Stephen a letter and to send him a letter in jail. We are encouraging folks to write solidarity letters to Stephen, and he should be getting letters in the coming weeks from people all around the world who support him, his activism, and are in defense of him at this moment where human rights are under attack in the United States and human rights defenders are in the crosshairs. So thanks again for having me on, and I hope that all of the listeners will take a minute to write to Attorney General Garland after this show or during this show.
Thank you so much. You know, Krystal, Stephen told me in a letter that he has received letters from every state in the United States, every province in Canada, and from countries around the world, and I'm sure in large part because of the work that you have done, Ali. So all of this energy really fuels the movement, so thank you.
And Natalie, thank you so much for all the amazing work that you've been doing. Can you talk us through what's next in the appeals process, what people can do to support that, and where you are in that appeal?
Thanks so much, Katie, for having me on today. You know, I think Ron actually covered pretty well earlier. You know, we did have on November 30th, Circuit Court as prosecuting same federal. It's not the federal justice circuit. So, you know, in conversation, even before, after, and he said, well, you know, he's not so interested in just the court process. right? It's also this movement, and building a movement that really focused on, as far as the Second Circuit or another, for the decision court, argument really focused.
Natalie, I'm so sorry. You're cutting out a lot, so we're having a hard time hearing you. I don't know if you could get closer to the microphone and try that. But let me throw a question at Ali in the meantime, which is that I think you made some incredibly important suggestions about how to keep the pressure on. Could you just talk a little bit more specifically about, because this is confusing, to ask Merrick Garland to take over the case? Why would we want to do that? What led us to the point where, Stephen is actually out there saying, please, Department of Justice, please be the ones to come after me instead of this private prosecutor?
Sure, and of course we're calling on Attorney General Marianne to take the case because there is a gross lack of accountability when it comes to this issue of a private prosecutor. Of course, the whole point of having the U.S. justice system is that there are people who have to who are accountable to others.
Like David Thoreau was saying.
There's an entire vacuum of that in this case. But we are appealing to the entire Biden administration to immediately and unconditionally release Stephen. But beyond that, Stephen should be granted compensation for what he's gone through. And we even think that there should be a full investigation into the way that he's been treated in the situation surrounding his legal situation. So,
Ali, have you seen anything like this? I mean, I've just never heard of anything remotely like this. I guess in a certain sense, it's a good thing that we're not hearing about it routinely. But is there any sort of precedent you can think about, or other instances that were similar that Amnesty International has come across?
Not in my time with Amnesty International. And what's been really interesting for me in this conversation is listening to the lawyers talk about how unprecedented this is. Mm-hmm. Lawyers have been doing this for longer than I've been alive. It's shocking and it's appalling. And, it is shocking, but it's also not terribly shocking. Like I mentioned before, there has been targeted persecution and harassment of human rights defenders. So it seems like this is just another example of the justice system being used against human rights defenders. And I'll give you another example that's somewhat different, but similar in terms of targeting human rights defenders. And that is the case of Scott Warren. He's a humanitarian aid worker based on the U.S.-Mexico border in Arizona. And he was facing 20 years in jail for providing humanitarian aid to migrants at the border. Wow. So Amnesty International campaigned globally on his behalf because we similarly saw this to be a misuse of the justice system here in the U.S. to target him for his work. So that's a similar case, but of course now Stephen has gone through this house detention and now he's incarcerated. And so what we're looking at now is truly an escalation.
Yeah, to that end, I'm curious, Natalie, if you have been tracking any of the kind of increase state by state in laws with the goal of targeting activists and what the response to that should be from the activist community.
So thanks so much for the question, and I hope they on now, but that you all talked about continuously over the course of the evening has been the power of corporations. And I think ultimately what this case is about, as Representative Tlaib talked about, it's a test case for corporate polluters. So when we talk about Chevron, and Chevron being the human energy company, or outing itself as being the human energy company, the irony of that is that they have yet to clean up the Amazon and account for all of the things that they have done. With the way that legislation moves in the country, it's often a response to the things that people are pushing for. So we saw after Standing Rock a criminalization of water protectors, of land defenders, of people that are fighting on the front lines, not just for water and land and earth, but actual existence. And so that survival and that existence is resistance. And as Berta Cáceres, who is a water protector from Honduras, said, "No nos queda otro camino," right? We don't have another path. We have to fight and we have to continue moving forward. I think Luis Yanza said it at the beginning, la lucha es colectiva, like we have to have a collective resistance and a collective struggle to continue pushing forward. And so with the power of corporations, I think that's ultimately what this case is about. This is why the Water Protector Legal Collective is behind Donziger, because he is a water protector. He's put his life on the line. He's put his legal career on the line. And what we've seen within this case is weaponization of the law. And as Ali was talking about, human rights defenders are routinely killed across the world for doing this type of work. In 2020, which was the year of the pandemic, kind of in it, but truly within 2020, there were 331 human rights defenders killed around the world for protecting land and indigenous rights and environmental rights. So if we are going to look at the legislation that's being passed, there's a ton of it and corporations behind that. And I recall years ago being very concerned about the rise of corporations as more powerful than nations. And I think I forget which CEO it was, but if you look at the global rankings of corporations and they match up with economies, national economies, of the top 100 countries and corporations, you have 71 of those are corporations. And so we have Walmart eating the economy of Spain, and you have Chevron with $197.8 billion and Fortune, 27 in the Fortune 500 corporations, and they can't pay a dime for a $9.5 billion judgment, which is pocket change to them. So if we're talking about the power of corporations, we have to start acknowledging too what that does within the United States. At Standing Rock, corporate mercenaries, for lack of a better word, but truly that's the descriptor. These were paid tiger swan operatives that took advantage, infiltrated the Standing Rock. We've seen similar things at Enter, and the ongoing criminalization of those that are willing to put their lives on the line, not just by corporations, but also in conjunction with the federal government in programs like COINTELPRO that targeted the Black that were behind the assassination of Fred Hampton, that were behind the incarceration of Leonard Peltier. So we still have political prisoners. Stephen Donziger is one. Thank you so much for your support. We need to free, and he's going to get through this. He's a positive person. He's a wonderful human being, and we do need support. So freedonziger.com, please get legal defense. And as I said, lo vamos a lograr. El río. So we are going to achieve this. River told me so.
Yes. Ladies, you're both incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you for your words.
Such great points.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your words tonight. Thank you for the incredible brave work that you are both doing to stand up for activists, from Donziger to many, many more.
Thank you.
And Berta Cáceres is a good reminder, by the way, of, Berta Cáceres, who Natalie mentioned, is someone who was killed after the coup in Honduras, and shout out to the new president of Honduras. But we know that the United States had a large hand in turning that country and turning Honduras into the murder capital of the world and creating a really booming femicide industry. And it was in that context, and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama refused to call it a coup, even though it was a coup. Hillary Clinton lied about why she wouldn't call it a coup, and it was in that context that Berta Cáceres, who was an environmental activist and indigenous rights activist, was killed. And so this is all really connected to the same story, and it's about how, it's a bipartisan thing to engage in real ecocide and genocide in the name of profits, and we see it happening under presence of both parties.
Well, we had a lot of conversation during the Trump era about norms, norms and guardrails. And so when you see a case like Stevens, that really is, it is that test case. It is, how far can we go? What can we do here? How much can we as a corporate entity with our money and power just take over the judicial system to serve our own ends in the United States of America?
And the point that Natalie was making about the relationship between the power of nation states, which is now less than the power of these huge multinational corporate conglomerates in many cases, and the dangers that this presents.
Yeah, the scale of this, I was reflecting on the fact that I think the very first piece I ever edited at The Intercept was a Kate Aronoff piece about COP, whatever it was at the time, COP 24. And I remember many paragraphs down, there was a kind of offhanded sentence about how many activists had been killed in that year. And I was horrified by this. And one of my editorial comments was, why is this so far down? This feels like big news to me, because I think that aspect of the climate justice fight isn't talked about enough, even though editors are constantly saying it's so difficult to get people to pay attention to environmental news. Everybody turns off for climate change. It's not sexy enough. It's not spicy enough. People are getting murdered around the world. Donziger has been in prison as a political prisoner, and it doesn't even make front page news then. So I'm very skeptical of this idea that journalists don't know how to make it sexy. I think it's much more about what we were talking about before with all these corporate influences.
A perfect, Donziger is a perfect case because, listen, we know we all do shows. We see what people want to click on, what they want to watch, and personalities and human beings are a major draw.
Handsome man too. I'm just going to put it out there. He's a handsome man. He's very tall.
Good-looking guy, very well spoken, articulate. I mean, he's a great character if you wanted to tell the story. There's no doubt. I mean, listen, we've all had him on our show. We know people are interested and they're appalled by what's going on if you want to bother to tell the story. So I think he is the perfect example of, because when I was at MSNBC, they outright told me this, climate change, it doesn't rate.
Snooze
fest. Doesn't rate. And it's like, well, but number one, is that really how we're measuring?
They do the same thing in every industry. They pretend like, there's no audience, there's no constituency, there's no consumer base. That's because you haven't created one. That's because you haven't educated people. That's because you haven't informed people. That's because you haven't created the appetite.
Well,
bastards.
With climate change especially, right? Because it's literally story after story about the weather.
It's part
of
the gaslighting.
Thing, right? About like people who live in this neighborhood, you see their car going down the street, took them this long to get to work, right?
There's literally an entire 24-hour channel of the Weather Channel dedicated to talking about the weather.
Connection between that and climate change. It's just a crazy thing that happens.
And I know you might not believe this, but when I was young, kids, breaking news actually meant something. I mean, everybody would come to the TV because it's breaking news. Now, there's no sense of proportion. Breaking news could be that Justin Bieber got a DWI.
He's clean now.
Nobody knows what they're supposed to consider important.
They'll literally do breaking news.
Right? What'd you say? What'd you say?
Just Justin Bieber's cleaned up his act now. He's a nice married man.
I'm sorry.
I
really do hear something, but that's not my point.
This is free Stephen Donziger, free Justin Bieber.
We will not tolerate Bieber shame on this panel.
And there's one other thing I think we should point out. This is everything we're talking about here tonight represents an all systems breakdown. Everybody knows that. And it will take an all systems response to repair our democracy, our planet, and so forth. Electoralism is part of it. It's not all of it, but it is part of it. Please remember that less than a year from now, we do have the midterm elections, and the time to get involved is right now in the primaries supporting the non-corporate backed candidates. Because no matter who wins, if it's a corporatist agenda, so I hope that you will get involved. One of the places that you can look to for suggestions about non-corporate-backed primary candidates is at a site called candidatesummit.com. There are other places as well, but this is the time during these primaries. This is when these non-corporate-backed candidates are having such a hard time getting in there, and this is the time that we should all be supporting them.
Wonderful point. We have our next guest is a perfect person to talk about these larger systems and corporate power in particular, Professor Richard Wolff. You guys probably know who he is, but he's host of Economic Update, visiting professor at the New School, founder of Democracy at Work, professor of economics emeritus at UMass Amherst. So great to see you, Professor.
Hi, Richard.
Hi. Glad to be here, and glad to see you doing what you're doing. It's a kind of wake-up call that we need a lot more of. So,
well, talk a little bit more about that. Thank you. We appreciate that and very grateful for your time. But talk a little bit more about that. It's a wake-up call about what? What should we be seeing here? Because we've been talking a lot about, this is kind of a test case for corporations of just how far they can push things.
Yeah, that's what I would like briefly to talk about. Capitalism is a system. We know that. Marianne just talked about this is a systemic problem. One of the features of this system is that it does away with small businesses. Competition, which we supposedly celebrate, is the mechanism whereby the losers are absorbed by the winners, and we end up with fewer and fewer and larger enterprises. Long ago, Americans understood that this concentration of wealth and power threatens basic values that we're supposed to be committed to. So as far back as 1890, we had the Sherman Antitrust Act, 1914, a follow-up Clayton Act. We have had efforts to stop, limit, break up the trusts. To be honest and to be brief, it doesn't work. These reforms have not been able to do what they were intended to do. Nothing illustrates that better than looking at a corporation like Chevron and then taking a look at all of the things companies like this do nowadays. And if we put them all together, with a focus on Donziger, you can begin to understand what's at stake here. So, for example, Chevron is one of the few companies, together with a few governments, that set the price of energy in this world. We are all held hostage for heating our homes, for running our vehicles, whatever it is, by a tiny handful of people who get together in fancy hotels around the world periodically to determine whether there'll be more or less of the fossil fuels and what prices, therefore, we will have to pay. Here's another example. We are now suffering, after 2 years of economic crash and a pandemic, we are suffering an inflation. But I'm the economist. Let me explain. An inflation happens when corporations raise prices. That's all that it is. And they don't do that for any other reason than making more profit. And I know that because they say so. That's what they do. And now we are learning not only are they shaping our oil and prices and our inflation and so much else about our environment, but if you dare, like Stephen Donziger, if you dare step in there and say, wait a minute, you're gone too far, you shouldn't at least not do this on top of all of that, you get assaulted by the concentration of wealth and power that overwhelms the judicial system, with one side being able to afford 1,000 lawyers and the other side nowhere near that. Money is buying the justice, just like money is buying the two parties. I mean, we are looking at a concentration of wealth and power that now literally runs vendettas against people who stand up and say, I am going to fight against this. If we don't do something, we really are headed, and I don't use the word lightly, to that coming together of corporate power and a subservient government that has a name in history, and it's called fascism.
We've just mentioned this climate reporter, Kate Aradoff, and she's written this book where she basically argues that we're not going to get climate reform under capitalism. If that's the case, if you agree with that statement, what do we do in a moment like this where we all make jokes about late-stage capitalism all the time, but it feels pretty concrete at the moment? What kind of moves do we make in a moment where we see all of these corporations being able to put these externalities out on the public, make so much money, have so much profit, co-opt the legal system in the way they've done, and it leaves us kind of feeling hopeless at times. What's next if the end of capitalism is the only way out?
Well, for me, it's what you're doing. It's being willing, which you are. And so many for long weren't willing to do it, which is to link the particular issue that aggravates you, the racism, the sexism, the ecological destruction, whatever it is. Have the courage to say what you just said. This problem is part of a systemic crisis of capitalism, particularly American capitalism, that is in trouble and is trying to hold on to the unequal distribution of wealth and power at a time when the system is in trouble. The more we link the particular to the more general, the more we will create the conditions for a coming together of all of the specific struggles because they will understand that they have something in common, the changing of the system that is behind all of the obstacles that they face. The more we do that, the closer we will get. And look, I share with you the frustration. It is hard. It is taking so long. You know, I give myself solace, and maybe it'll help you too. There was a famous political leader, whose name I won't mention, who was berated by his associates. It's taking so long. It's taking so long. Decades, nothing is happening. And he smiled and he looked at them and he said, "You're right. For decades, nothing happens. And then in a few weeks, decades happen."
Great. Although I think it's also important, though, Richard, and I know you and I have had this conversation, just as you said, you have to link the specific to the general. We also have to mention those specifics that so matter. And if Ronald Reagan had not started that orgy of deregulation of capitalism, really creating this explosion of such unfettered strain of capitalism, then things might have gone differently. And you have talked about how this hybrid of capitalist and socialist systems, as it works in many cases in Europe, for instance, is an option here in the United States. You yourself have said it's a bad idea to think of capitalism and socialism as just a switch that you turn off and then turn another one on. It's a gradual process, knowing what should be left to the market, what should be left to government for control. I mean, isn't that a correct appraisal of the things that you say?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's an open issue. I like to tell Americans about what goes on in Europe, not because the Europeans don't have terrible problems, they do, and all of that, but to show that even within a capitalism, there are ranges of possibilities that are way beyond what the United States is willing to tell its people about, or even to think about. When I explain to American audiences that in France, a country that I know particularly well, when you graduate high school or college and you get your first job, the employer asks you which are the 5 weeks of paid vacation you will be planning to take this year, because that's the law, because socialists have put that law on the books. And even conservatives in France are afraid to say boo about it because they'd be voted out of office in 10 minutes if they ever threatened that kind of thing. I mean, these things are not imaginary. These things are not impossible. But you're right, even when you get them in a place like France, just like when we got certain things in the Great Depression. If you don't do something about the basic system, you discover you've left in place that capitalism that will then go to work to undo whatever reform you were able to achieve and put you right back to square one, which is why I began the story tonight telling you about Sherman and Clayton Act, because we have tried to stop big concentrations of corporate power, reforms, laws, regulations, electing this one or that didn't do the job. And that's because the system reinforces, replaces, resumes the focus on producing huge concentrations. That is the problem that the Stephen Donziger case brings to the fore so powerfully.
Been trained to expect so little. And too many people weren't around or were children, don't even remember what a difference the Reagan administration made, which is not to glamorize or whitewash American corporations before that time, but at least there was a consensus that there should be some level of corporate responsibility. And now what Reagan started, what the Republicans started, no Democrat has stopped. And it's just further and further fuel for this unfettered, unregulated, dark strain of capitalism that now has so many young people who say, what the hell has global capitalism ever done for me? I don't blame them. They look at socialism and they go, what am I supposed to be afraid of? The free health care or the free college? And so it's happening. It's a conversation
Have you been reading
on the
my text
table, and
messages,
that's where it belongs, right?
Have you been reading my emails? It sounds like a direct quote from me.
Well,
You're thinking what? I don't write my own material? Excuse me.
Go ahead, Professor.
But there is a remarkable irony, isn't there? That on the one hand, we complain about, we protest, as we rightly should, this case and all the other injustices. But again, the very accumulation, the repeated insistence that we have that these are not necessary, these are not justified, these are systemic in their roots and their origin, these insistences add up. And despite our frustration, I for sure will say to you, I never expected in my lifetime, and I was born in Ohio and I've lived and worked all my life in the United States. I never expected to see the level of consciousness, of critical consciousness. And when Marianne says, people are saying, what's so bad about socialism? After 75 years of a consistent demonization of that term, that Americans in such numbers are open to say that, even in a casual way, it tells you below the surface things are shifting very big time.
And we didn't even realize, the question we're all asking you is what is to be done, which is how we could have opened.
Yeah, well, I think
it's a little Lenin joke for the
I think the point that you make that Donziger is effectively a symptom.
Yes.
His persecution is a symptom of what Marianne described as an all systems problem that would require an all system solution. Professor,
needed enough big mouth women.
There you go.
And our enablers of all genders.
Professor,
with
thank
people
you.
like you explaining
We're
it all
always,
to us. Thank you, Richard.
We're always
Thank
so happy
you
to
so
speak
much.
with you and have your wisdom
All
and
I
your
can
insights.
tell you is we're cheering you on. We appreciate that you took the initiative to make this happen. Do it again. All of us are rooting for you out here.
Right back at you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Wow.
Up next.
Everyone share the stream. Share. We got to
Share
get
the
a lot
stream.
of eyes. Share the stream and like the stream. Yeah.
Continue, if you guys can, give on the Super Chat or freedonziger.com. Katie's donating all of the Super Chat proceeds to Stephen's Legal Defense Fund because the legal bills that this man has racked up, intentionally too, by the way. They
Not
do
on his
this
part intentionally.
No.
But
Chevron, this is a strategy. You could probably speak to this. If you feel like you have more resources than the party you're going after, you drag out discovery, you make them respond to a million things to try to make it as expensive, to basically bleed them dry financially.
We didn't get into a lot of the details of the case. I'm going to defer to you on this. I just want to share one detail of the case, which I think is telling, which is that when Loretta Preska, the judge who sentenced him to 6 months in federal prison, when she read his sentence, she said it seems only the proverbial 2x4 between the eyes will work to instill a sense of justice or respect for the law for Mr. Donziger.
Animus
The fact that you are saying this out loud and you write it down, this is such a show trial. This is so scary.
Over an offense so minor. That even, listen, it's bullshit to start with. But even if he was truly guilty, no lawyer has ever been sent to prison for this, let alone, this is a minor discovery conflict. That's all it is. The kind of skirmishes that lawyers have all the time. And not only they sent him to prison for 6 months, federal prison for 6 months, but more than 2 years of house arrest.
Yeah, and I will say that we've been talking a lot about the different ways that there's corporate capture in the court system, but there's one way we haven't discussed, which is that so many of these judges simply just transferred over from law firms. All of these, I don't want to say an overwhelming majority, but I suspect an overwhelming majority of these federal judges used to just work at Gibson Dunn or one of their peer firms, doing exactly this kind of work. So it's not even necessarily that there needs to be intentional capture at times. It's just that the natural orientation of so many of these judges is to side with these corporate plaintiffs. A lot of public defenders complain often that there's also an imbalance in terms of more prosecutors being on the bench than public defenders. And that has a direct effect on how these people are holding on motions and limine all kinds of minor issues that come up in a case, not just even if there's a jury trial, right? Even if they aren't in control of the verdict in the way that they were in this instance. So, it's something to think about. We don't have substantive conversations about the judiciary outside of really the Supreme Court context. But as I reflect over my legal career and the conversations that were had as we tried to assess, is this judge going to be friendly to us or not? There were a lot of conversations about how this person's from this firm and I know them from them, and we used to have it's a small club, and you're not in it.
Gross world.
And both Judge Preska and Judge Kaplan very connected to the Federalist Society.
Which takes a lot
money
of
from Chevron.
oil and gas money. Surprise, surprise. We have another wonderful guest to sort of bring home the issues at stake here. An incredible actress, also an incredible activist, and some liberals would even tell you that she can move elections, presidential elections, with a single word. Of course, I'm talking about the all-powerful Susan Sarandon. Welcome, Susan. Great to see you.
And you guys have been so amazing. I mean, I love that you're not just bitching, that we're really getting informative information, people that haven't been following the ins and outs, that we understand now how this is just a symptom of a much bigger problem, which is why Chevron is trying to make an example of Stephen. And then you're giving information so we can write to him. And then Nina Turner, you can't get any better than Nina kind of rousing everybody and also talking about, because one of the things when everyone's being so cautious about everything, you forget, you don't want to hear that we're on fire now, that this is the make it or break it time, that the system is disintegrating and what's going to come up in its place. And that's why so many young people are either putting their bodies on the line and or are just saying, I'm waiting for a leader. I just can't take it anymore. I fought so hard for Bernie. I've been working in, community. Let's do community because I can't stand electoral politics anymore. And Stephen is just such a brilliant example of something that you can really take your energy and be there for him, because it just has revealed what's wrong with everything. And on top of that, you couldn't write this if you were trying to come up with a really moving story of thousands of people that Chevron just assumed were going to be voiceless, and they dump all this toxic and kill over 2,000 people. And then this guy comes along, this young guy, they win the case, they get all this money. Chevron just decides to, basically take him down as an example to anyone else that's even thinking of taking on corporate anything. They're going to make him the poster boy for we will ruin your life, and on top of that, we're not going to pay. So I agree with Marianne. We have reason to be hopeful because you do see that there are a lot of people that are talking and working and trying some way in their communities and finding something to do that gives their life meaning and direction, and everything good that's ever happened has always happened from the bottom up. It's never happened from the top down. And I'm going to announce that I'm going to run for parliamentarian right now.
Yes, I support it.
This is the most powerful person that we never knew about.
Yeah.
No one will ever accuse you of being overly cautious, Susan. And the combination of your activism and your artistry, it is such a high level of excellence and brilliance in both that has captured both the imagination and the admiration of so many of us. There is a viral video that's out right now out of Peter Jackson's new documentary about the Beatles, where you actually see Paul McCartney just hanging out, playing have you seen this? Mm-hmm. He's just kind of hanging out, right? And then he comes up with Get Back, and you actually watch the creative process. I had a moment like that with you, because you and I were both in the courtroom when Judge Preska came out. And I saw how you were looking at her, and I was looking at you because I was so fascinated. I'm watching one of the great actresses. Oh, I hope she'll play Judge Preska. I was watching. I was watching her. I was watching and hoping, and I didn't want to say anything, so I didn't know if I should say anything. No, I'm saying it in front of all these people. But Krystal was talking about how it's a great case. It would be a great movie, and I saw how you were watching Judge Preska. Katie was talking before about the mean-spiritedness that she has displayed, and you and I were seeing it that day, but it was fascinating, I have to say, watching you watch her.
And at a certain point, she starts reading the newspaper. I mean, interrupting and saying, do you really want to use your time that way? Do you really, you only have 20 minutes. Do you really want to use your, just pushing people to the brink, these very respected lawyers trying to talk in their statements, and she just kept interrupting. She was rude. She was so petty and so empowered and so just oh God, it would be a great character because she's so loathsome.
Yeah.
And now she'll probably, I'll get in trouble for saying this, but I don't care. I mean, it was kind of shocking to see just how undemocratic the whole thing was. I mean, when we came out, Marianne said, well, I thought it was going to be bad, but I didn't understand it would be this bad.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was a mockery, really, of a trial.
David Serrato, when we were talking to him earlier about, the lack of media coverage and why, they weren't getting the story until he was already in prison, finally there was a tiny bit of coverage. And he said that, we explored a lot of issues around corporate power and those things, but also he said, I think a lot of people had a sense of like, surely this isn't really going to happen. Surely somebody's going to intervene. I mean, I even kept thinking like, surely they're going to at least credit him for the frickin' 2+ years that he served. And so
the UN came out with a statement just a few days before the sentencing. Remember that? The statement that they made.
Yeah,
so that
UN
was,
High Commissioner.
Well,
Americans have been trained to not care what the UN has to say.
Well, I actually, I was thinking about that, Marianne, because I think it's profoundly important that they released a statement, Amnesty International, saying, this is illegal, and not only does he need to be released, but he should be paid reparations. And you have members of Congress who sent letter to the Justice Department. Of course, they could be doing a lot more, but they don't even feel the need to respond. Yeah. I mean, that feels like, I don't know.
You get people if you respond, then you're on the record. If you don't respond, then you're not being. Right. I'm also concerned. Why haven't we heard from a lot of other environmental groups? Why? I mean, the only one I know that said anything was Amazon. Which one? No, Amazon.
And Greenpeace has too.
Greenpeace has spoken.
Greenpeace and Amazon Watch.
There's a lot of other Conservation International. I mean, anything to do with people that are concerned with water. Why haven't all of these groups this is what we have to do for any kind of justice issue. It has to go across labels, color, age, everything. That's where the power comes, as long as everybody's in their bubble. And I'm afraid that sometimes it's because people are afraid, again, of their finance. This is why when Bernie was running, there were people that really wanted to speak out, but their groups were funded by Bloomberg, for instance, had given a huge amount of money to people that wanted to say something, but couldn't because they were so afraid of losing their funding. And I think that I've been surprised that that people always say, well, there must have been something else that happened. This couldn't possibly, it's not. He must have done something, there must have been. And of course he didn't turn over his cell phone and his computer because, as you went so eloquently through all the people that are killed constantly, you can't give that kind of information to anybody that's working, activists that are working environmentally, especially in these countries where everyone's counting on you not knowing what's going on. Any place where brown people are, I think Chevron must have been just shocked that these people were chosen because they didn't have a voice. And now somebody's actually pursuing this for years and years and years, taking it to international court, and they rule in their favor. I mean, that's shocking to Chevron, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's incredibly rare. And the other missing piece to your point, Krystal, I think that it is important that Amnesty International and these groups are validators. The UN is a validator. But if no one takes that validation and actually is able to put that question to the administration that can do something about it, nothing happens. So we saw what kind of explosive outrage there was a few days ago when a reporter actually asked a good question of Jen Psaki about why we don't have these tests mailed to everybody, right, for free. And that caused a kind of hullabaloo you could expect to see all kinds of times if reporters decided to actually ask the administration directly and publicly about these kinds of questions. But I don't know, and maybe I've missed it, how frequently people have actually asked at these kind of press conferences or any other kind of media event where we have access to Biden himself or his spokespeople what he thinks about instances like Stephen Donziger.
Well, that's what would be great, wouldn't it? The next time there's a press conference and the president is answering questions, wouldn't it be great if a journalist said, Mr. President, are you going to commute the sentence of Stephen Donziger? And that's exactly what we want to see happen and what events like this help to create the energy for.
Yeah.
What about a movie, though, Susan? Don't you think it would be a great movie?
I think it would be a great movie, absolutely.
Continuing throw it together, all the
movies go
Hollywood
a lot
types.
to
There we go. Lucy Lawless,
Yeah.
Brandon.
You know,
I already started casting it with him and his son. We had Stephen on once, and his son came in the room, and we tried to figure it out. Maybe Harrison Ford, I think my audience thought would be good. Harrison Ford, Tom Hanks, George Clooney.
I mean, you know, and this isn't to make light of that direction at all, because
No, it's not light.
film is extraordinarily important for communicating that message. I mean, that's why Sirota helped to make the movie that he did. Speak to that aspect of things, Susan. And has there been any sort of attention or understanding of this case in Hollywood at all?
Stephen has been contacted.
Well, first of all, I'm the last person that knows what's going on in Hollywood.
Come on, tell us.
Since they did the expose on.
You know, honestly, if it's a good story, I'm sure somebody would be interested in doing it. Maybe they're waiting to find out the ending.
There you go.
It's always possible to get the money up if people are willing to work for nothing, and it's a good story. I mean, so I haven't heard anything. I think probably people are looking toward it, but let's write him letters and send donations and get him out so it has a happy ending.
Well, I would love to see Susan Sarandon as Judge Prescott. That's for sure. That would be an amazing courtroom scene.
Thank you so much.
I saw the real one, but the one with Susan Sarandon would even be better.
I don't know. What is her backstory? Where did she go wrong?
Where is she from?
Lithuanian
parents?
I saw that in your eyes. I saw that while you were looking. I
Were
saw
not
how you
enough
were looking.
mothers nursing their children. What happened?
It's always the mother's fault.
Yeah, she does have big Wicked Witch energy.
She clearly was having a great time.
Yeah,
That was
being so
cooking,
mean.
She was having a great time, and she felt very empowered. And all the bustling back and forth of the other gal too. They were so patronizing. That was the thing that was extraordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
The way they were
psychopathic.
treating the lawyers who we heard tonight.
Yeah.
That's psychopathic
Garvis
to be
and-
taking actual pleasure
Yeah, reading the
out of
newspaper.
being in that position. That's sick. That is actually
I would never
sick.
have thought to play it that way. It was mesmerizing.
Wow.
She was really out of control. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I'm putting all my faith in the young folk. I think that they know a lot more than the old people that I know, that like me, that are just, that are stuck on watching CNN, MSNBC, and really are terrified to admit what's actually going on, because they just can't go there, because they'd rather hold on to their illusions, at this point. And so I think that it's very hard to shift a lot of those people if they're not in that lane already, to be open and inquisitive. So we have to focus on the young people who don't identify with Democrat or Republican, who go more for issues, who understand that the world that's on fire is their world, and who want to live a life that is whose energy comes from doing the just thing across the board, because all of these things, this environmental situation is completely predicated on racism. And that's how so much of this happens. And Richard was talking about the systemic problem of capitalism. Well, that's true. And why do we hold on to it when it gives us so little? It's because it's the bad, abusive partner, that we've been with for so long. And how do we get people to understand? And maybe just at this point, because things are so bad, because this will allow the cracks where the light comes in, as Leonard Cohen says. That's what happens when something cracks. So I'm choosing to be hopeful and to think that a better world is possible.
I think that's all any of us can do, and keep acting
Yes.
as if that possibility can become reality. Susan, we're so grateful.
You're a radical truth teller on screen and off, Susan.
Thank you. And you guys,
Much love to you.
Serious. You too.
Thank you.
God
Thank
bless
you.
you.
Great to see you,
Thank you.
Susan.
I look forward to continuing to end row with her going into the future.
Yeah.
Since it's all our fault, according to Twitter.
Right.
But that's
Oh,
neither
I see
here
what
nor
you're
there.
saying.
Yeah. Well,
I know. Maybe she could use the power that she used to get Hillary Clinton elected. She could use it to free Donziger. I should have asked her. I should
Damn
have.
it.
You see, that's the kind of hard
Missed our
questions that no one asks Saki.
She goes straight from her heart to her lips.
Yeah.
She just goes straight. This is what I feel. This is what I know.
And you can
Right
tell.
to you.
You can tell when a person is like that. It's very clear.
Yeah, and when you and Susan were both on Bad Faith, I asked Susan about the kind of the consequences professionally of being so, politically forward and kind of brave in the way that she's been. And I think it's interesting to me to observe both she and Lucy Lawless kind of say, I'm not in that Hollywood machine anymore.
Yeah,
And
both of them were very like, that's
not my
Hollywood.
world.
I have
And
no idea. Yeah.
I'm curious how much of that is, by choice and how much they have received blowback or how much they've stepped away personally because that's the only way that they really feel like they can articulate their full political selves. And, certainly we've experienced what that kind of ostracization can look like in the world of journalism, rather. And there's no place you can live, work, and breathe that you don't experience that kind of hegemonic force of lining up with the corporatist mainstream.
Right. Well, the shadow side of capitalism has made everybody so focused on brand protection. If I say it, I'll sell fewer widgets. If I say, I received a contract today for a speaking assignment, speaking,
engagement.
Speaking, gig. And I couldn't believe the things that they put in the contract. You will not discuss politics. You will not discuss anything fear-based that does not also speak to solutions. I've never seen anything like
not politics.
It's like, well, you know who I am? Have you ever heard me?
Why did you pick me to speak here? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what's really the next step for our generation, and I think that this really speaks to everything that we're talking about today. The era of data collection is over. We really know everything we need to know. The issue now is will we have the courage to make the changes that we know.
Data collection of another sort.
Now it's a matter of what do you say?
No, data collection is happening, just of another sort. But
well, I think so much of the data collection that we need, we now have.
Yes, we have
we
the
have been
information.
presented
with the
not only
information,
the specifics by all of us, by David, et cetera, but the systemic by people like Chris Hedges and Richard Wolff. And now it's, will we find the courage to do what we need to do to save the world in time?
Yeah.
And I think when we see people like Stephen Donziger, who have stood by his principles, stood by his ethics, despite all else, are standing for Stephen. We're seeing demonstrated right there what it means to be a person who really stands on your values. We see the price that he has paid doing so, and I think it is right and appropriate and good that we're standing up to the best of our ability for him. We hope all of you will go to freedonziger.com, do what you can. You can also make a monthly donation. Help him have that legal representation that he needs, right?
Absolutely.
And we'll all continue, right?
Yeah.
None of us are going to stop.
For sure. For sure. And I think we have one more person who we wanted to bring into this conversation. One of several of my partners in crime, Kyle Kalinsky, is actually driving on his way down here to record the podcast with me tomorrow, but he wanted to make sure that he got to have his say in here as well, because he's also a strong supporter of Stephen. Let's take a listen to that.
So first of all, I want to say a big thank you to Krystal, Katie Halper, Marianne Williamson, Briahna Joy Gray, and everybody who's involved in this event. I think this is super important. I think we need maximum pressure to be exerted to try to get a good outcome out of a bad situation in regards to Stephen Donziger. And so let's talk a little bit about him, because this is egregious, what happened to this man. I mean, it is indicative of the United States effectively being a corporatocracy where corporations really run the show and our so-called representative government is more or less a farce. So let's run through the facts of the case. Stephen Donziger is a lawyer, and he was able to successfully prosecute the oil company Chevron for what they did in Ecuador. The details of what they did in Ecuador are astounding. I mean, it was their dumping ground. It was, people were poisoned, water sources were destroyed. It was a $9.5 billion win for the people of Ecuador, again, largely thanks to the work of great people like Stephen Donziger. Now, of that $9.5 billion, how much money did Chevron actually end up paying out to the people of Ecuador? $0.00. And this is something that you unfortunately see when it comes to the international community and how the U.S. acts in regards to it. We ignore them. It goes without saying, but when you look at the war crimes committed by the Bush administration, for example, nobody's been held accountable. Paul Wolfowitz, Donald Rumsfeld, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney. These people are as free as can be when they violated every international law in the books. And as Noam Chomsky famously said, if the Nuremberg laws were upheld, every post-World War II U.S. president would be hanged. We flat out ignore international law. We ignore the International Criminal Court, for example. Well, here you have a corporation being found guilty. They owe the people of Ecuador $9.5 billion because of the damages, thanks to Stephen Donziger, and they paid out absolutely none of it, and then in turn, they threw the book at Stephen Donziger. So what happened? Well, they mucked up a BS charge against him. Remember, again, multiple courts found Chevron guilty. They owe $9.5 billion to Ecuador. In response to that, in U.S. courts, they tried to get Stephen Donziger to turn over his computer and his cell phone. Now, nominally they wanted to do this in relation to the case and Chevron, but effectively, he would have to turn over his computer and his cell phone to Chevron. So he said, I'm not going to do that. This is absurd, and nobody in my position would do that. Well, then they charged him with a Class B misdemeanor, contempt of court. Now, you hear Class B misdemeanor, and you probably think, well, there's not much they can get him on with a Class B misdemeanor. Well, if you continue to bend the rules, there absolutely is. And they've effectively ruined this guy's life over this. So he got a sentence of 6 months in prison. That's the maximum sentence you can get for a Class B misdemeanor. But more importantly, he spent about 800 days in house arrest with an ankle bracelet on. He couldn't leave. He missed a lot of great years with his family. And what his lawyer was trying to do was say, look, this is already absurd, but give him time served for the amount of time he was in solitary confinement. Now, the maximum sentence that somebody had served for the crime that they were trying to muck up against him was 90 days of home confinement. So he spent 800 days in home confinement. And then on top of that, when he went for sentencing, they gave him 6 months in a federal prison. 6 months. Now, how the hell could this possibly happen? Well, very simply, he didn't face a jury. He didn't face a jury, and the judge, there were multiple judges involved in this whole fiasco, but the judge who doled out this sentence has connections to Chevron and is part of the Federalist Society. But more importantly, there was a private law firm that prosecuted him, and they're also funded by Chevron. So look at the facts here. This guy defeats Chevron in a court of law, wins a $9.5 billion settlement for the people of Ecuador for what Chevron did to them. They don't pay out any of it, and then they muck up all these charges, throw them at Stephen Donziger, and give him way more than what the maximum sentence even would be for the fake charge that they mucked up against him. And it's all because Chevron effectively bought the judge, and the prosecution is a private law firm which is funded by Chevron. Look, it goes without saying, it's the most obvious thing in the world, but free Stephen Donziger. Free him, and for the love of God, he should get some sort of, apology and financial reward for all this garbage that he had to go through. But as Stephen likes to say, and this is completely true, what we're dealing with here is a situation where it's not just about him now, because now we've set the precedent. And the precedent is, in the United States of America, the corporations rule all. They can rig the system to the high heavens, and they could throw the book at you when you beat them, when you take them down, when you bring about justice. And there's never been a clearer example of it than this. So listen, again, thanks to the wonderful women who are putting on this event. This was sorely needed. Free Stephen Donziger, free him now. And look, while we're at it, I'll just throw this out there as well. Free Julian Assange. Let Edward Snowden come home. Free Daniel Hale, the drone whistleblower. This is unacceptable, man. This is absolutely unacceptable. And this precedent is as scary as it gets, because this is the United Corporate States of America, and the biggest crime, according to them, is defeating them fairly. And that can't stand.
That's right. And he's good.
Amen, yeah.
That's it. I mean, and how many times have we seen that? And he called out the names of the person who exposes the wrongdoing or holds the powerful accountable.
Is the only one.
They're the only one that actually pays the price.
Yeah, this is blowback.
That's it.
Total inversion.
That's it.
Kafka-esque.
Thank you guys for watching.
Yes.
Thank you, so many of you. We've seen donating. I know probably a lot more went to freedonziger.com. Please do that if you're able to, because they have tried as a strategy, Chevron, to bleed this man dry. His legal bills are absolutely insane. And he is going to get out of prison in 5 months. And he'll be able to, if the Biden administration doesn't hear our pleas, that's the worst case scenario. And he's going to go about rebuilding his life, and you guys can help support him. But the point we've tried to make over the course of the evening is, listen, this has been, personally, I can't even imagine what he's been through. I mean, he has a son, he has a wife, son's in high school. I mean, just the personal part of this is bad enough. But the bigger picture, the precedent that's set, the guardrail that's been broken, which we heard so much about during the Trump years, but suddenly when it comes to this case, no one is there to call that out. That's the part that's really frightening and has devastating consequences for the climate, for human rights activists, for really all of us in the type of country that we want to live in.
Yeah, there's definitely a cohort of our political landscape whose ears close up if you say the word systemic. We have these epic arguments about, CRT and is it Marxist to talk about systemic X, Y, and Z. I just had a lengthy conversation with Andrew Sullivan about this on the podcast, and we go back and forth. But if nothing else, I hope that learning about instances like what's going on with Stephen Donziger exposes the extent to which so many systems that we consider to be neutral and impartial and above it all really aren't. And they are controlled by the politicians who appoint them, the background of the judges, the corrupt news media, the lack of exposure, the way that the law is weaponized against people who don't have money, and on and on and on. And I hope that this informs the way that we talk about other kinds of instances, including the criminal justice context and the extrajudicial context, and is really a launching pad for those who might not even be of the left to start to think critically about all the ways that we could better build our systems to have more just outcomes across the board.
And this should not be seen as a right-left issue, because in a very real way, it's not. It's a right-wrong issue. And this is a moment in our history, really every moment is this, but this moment, it is of historic significance that we remember that if you see something wrong, silence cannot be an option. Speak up.
And this also isn't just about Stephen rebuilding his life, although that's a very important part of it. This is also about Stephen continuing to fight the fight that he's fighting.
Oh, he'll have some amazing things to say when he gets out.
Well, and I spoke to Luis Llanza, and we played some of that interview, and he says, the struggle requires Stephen's liberty, and the struggle requires that we then go on to make Chevron pay what they owe us, right? Because again, this is about Chevron not having to pay what they were demanded to pay. And this is the struggle. The struggle to free Stephen Donziger is also the struggle to bring justice to the people of Ecuador. And those two things still have to be done. And they go hand in hand. So don't think that this is just about helping someone, get out of jail and move on. This is about helping someone so he can keep fighting the good fight. And he'll keep doing that. And make sure you go to freedonziger.com. Also, you can subscribe to the Katie Halper Show. And we'll be posting more videos with some of the people, full-length videos. And but most importantly, really support Stephen Donziger, support the people of Ecuador, free Stephen Donziger, and bring justice to the people of Ecuador.
And thank you, Katie, for helping to organize all of this. And thank you, Krystal, for the use of this studio without which we wouldn't be able to do any of this.
It is my pleasure to have all of you ladies here. I hope we can do this again and maybe, tackle some other topics.
The alternative
fair.
Right?
Yeah.
The alternative view.
The alternative view.
We're doing the view. The alternative view. It all happens here.
All right. Love you guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone who came and joined this to watch and also who spoke to us on the show.
Yep. Have a good night.
Bye.